Montana Territory, late autumn, 1883. The land stretched vast and wild beneath a sky turning the color of bruised plums. Wind whistled through the tall prairie grass, carrying the promise of the first winter snow. Josephine Tremaine sat alone by the window of the train car, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap. The rhythmic click-clack of wheels on tracks had been her only companion for days, that and the occasional whisper of the dead. Like now. A woman stood beside the tracks as the train slowed, a Comanche woman in a deerskin dress, adorned with intricate beadwork, her long black hair moving through there was no wind, her eyes dark and knowing fixed on Joe. One slender arm rose, pointing ahead toward the small station coming into view. Joe looked away, her jaw tightening. She had learned long ago not to acknowledge the spirits in public. The living rarely understood. She focused instead on the letter in her pocket, worn soft at the edges from countless readings. The promises written in a steady hand by Matthew Dalton of Pine Creek, Montana. I have a small ranch, good land, and a quiet life to offer. I seek a woman of education who isn't afraid of hard work. I can promise respect, and in time perhaps affection. Joe had read those words until they were etched into her memory, a last chance after all the others had turned her away. The train whistle pierced the air announcing their arrival. Joe gathered her worn carpet bag and the small trunk containing her few possessions, books mostly, and the herbs she'd collected and dried throughout the summer. Her heart beat a rapid staccato against her ribs. Would he be kind? Would he look at her and see only her dark hair and copper skin? Or would he see her? The platform was nearly empty when Joe stepped down from the train. A few townspeople milled about collecting packages or greeting other passengers. None approached her. The Comanche woman's spirit had vanished, but Joe felt eyes on her, nonetheless. Living eyes, curious and judgmental. "You looking for someone, miss?" The station master, a balding man with suspicious eyes, barely glanced up from his ledger. "Matthew Dalton?" Joe replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. "He was to meet me." The station master squinted, then shook his head. "Ain't unheard of no Matthew Dalton round these parts." Cold dread settled in Joe's stomach. She stood straighter, unwilling to show fear. "He owns a ranch near Pine Creek." Two young men lounging against a barrel nearby snickered. One nudged the other, whispering something that made them both laugh louder. "There she is," one called out, just loud enough for Joe to hear. "The half-blood bookkeeper. Thought she'd marry herself a rancher, did she?" Heat crawled up Joe's neck. She turned away, clutching her bag tighter. This was Fort Union all over again. Whispers following her like shadows, half savage. "Indian lover. Strange one who talks to ghosts." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the wooden platform. Other passengers had long since dispersed. Joe sat alone on a bench, the letter crushed in her fist. Fooled again. How many times would she let hope make her vulnerable? A soft noise made Joe look up. A small figure stood before her, a child, perhaps 4 years old, with golden curls escaping from beneath a woolen cap. Her eyes, a striking blue-green, regarded Joe with unabashed curiosity. "Are you lost?" the little girl asked, her head tilted to one side. Joe managed a small smile. "No, sweetheart, just waiting." The girl moved closer, studying Joe's face. "You look sad." "I'm fine." Joe straightened her skirt, uncomfortable with the child's scrutiny. "I'm Lily," the girl announced. "Who are you?" "Josephine, Joe." Lily nodded solemnly as if confirming something important. Then with the bluntness only children possess, she asked, "Can you see my mama too?" Joe froze. The question struck her like a physical blow. Before she could answer, a deep voice called out, "Lily, what have I told you about wandering off?" A man strode toward them, his gait purposeful but not hurried. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore the practical clothes of a working man, sturdy trousers, a wool coat worn soft at the elbows, boots caked with dried mud. His face was weathered with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun. A long scar ran down his right cheek from temple to jaw. But it was his eyes that caught Joe's attention. They were the same striking blue-green as the child's, yet where hers held innocent curiosity, his contained wariness. "I'm sorry about my daughter," he said, placing a protective hand on Lily's shoulder. "She shouldn't bother strangers." "She wasn't bothering me," Joe replied, rising from the bench. She stood almost as tall as he did, unusual for a woman. Lily tugged at her father's coat. Papa, she's the one Mama said would come. The man's expression shifted, embarrassment flitting across his features. Lily, we have talked about this. Your mama is... He stopped, glancing at Joe. I apologize. She has an active imagination. Joe nodded, understanding more than he realized. It's all right. His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her. You waiting on someone? Yes, though it seems I've been misled. Joe couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Misled? I was to meet a Mr. Matthew Dalton. He wrote offering employment. The lie came easily. Better than admitting she'd come as a mail-order bride only to be stood up again. The man's expression darkened. Matthew Dalton, you say? Yes, do you know him? He was quiet for a moment, jaw working. I know of him. Look, miss. Tremaine, Josephine Tremaine. Miss Tremaine. Night's coming on and there's no hotel in Pine Creek. Just a saloon with rooms that, well, not suitable for a lady. I'm Samuel Winters. My place isn't far. You're welcome to stay the night, head back to Fort Union tomorrow. Joe hesitated. The offer seemed genuine, but she'd learned to be cautious with men's hospitality. It's getting cold, he added softer, and my Lily seems to have taken a shine to you. As if to confirm this, Lily slipped her small hand into Joe's. The simple trust in the gesture made Joe's chest tighten. Thank you, Mr. Winters. That's very kind. Samuel nodded once, then bent to pick up Joe's trunk. It's Sam, just Sam. The walk to Sam's homestead took nearly an hour, following a narrow trail that wound through stands of pine and across open meadows gone golden in the fading light. Lily chattered the entire way, asking Joe questions about where she'd come from and if she liked horses and could she read stories. Sam said little, answering only when Lily directly appealed to him. Joe sensed he was a man of few words by nature, but also that he was watching her, assessing. The cabin appeared just as dusk settled fully over the land, a sturdy structure built of rough-hewn logs with a small covered porch and a stone chimney from which smoke curled lazily. A barn stood nearby, and beyond that a corral where 2 horses grazed. It wasn't large, but Joe could see it had been built with care. It's not much, Sam said, setting down her trunk, but it's warm. It's lovely, Joe replied honestly. Inside the cabin was simple but well kept. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, its flames casting dancing shadows across the wooden floor. A table with 4 chairs stood in what served as the kitchen. A curtain divided the single room, presumably separating sleeping areas. You can have my bed, Sam said, gesturing to the curtain. Lily and I will sleep by the fire. I couldn't possibly, I insist. His tone brooked no argument. You're our guest. Joe felt oddly touched by the courtesy. In Fort Union, few had treated her with such consideration. Lily tugged at Joe's skirt. Will you read me a story before bed? Papa tries, but he's not very good at the voices. Sam cleared his throat. Lily, Miss Tremaine, is tired from her journey. I don't mind, Joe said, surprised by her own words. I love reading stories. Lily beamed. I'll get my book. As the child scampered off, Sam rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. You don't have to humor her. I want to. Joe's eyes were drawn to a shelf in the corner of the room. On it sat several small objects, a string of turquoise beads, a pouch of what looked like dried sage, and a small carving of a horse. Beside these stood a carefully folded dress, beautifully beaded in the Comanche style. Sam followed her gaze. Those were my wife's. Joe nodded, waiting for him to continue. She was Comanche. He said it like a challenge, watching for her reaction. They're beautiful, Joe said simply. Something in Sam's posture eased slightly. Before he could say more, Lily returned, clutching a worn copy of The Water Babies. Later, after Lily had fallen asleep and Sam had gone to check on the horses, Joe found herself alone in the cabin. She moved quietly to the shelf with Naira's belongings drawn by an inexplicable pull. The Comanche woman's spirit stood beside the shelf, more visible now in the firelight. She was beautiful, with high cheekbones and eyes that held both kindness and sorrow. She pointed to the floorboards beneath the shelf, her movements urgent. Joe knelt, running her fingers along the wooden planks until she found one that shifted slightly. Glancing toward the door to ensure Sam hadn't returned, she carefully pried up the loose board. Beneath it lay a small bundle wrapped in deerskin. Joe's fingers trembled as she unwrapped it, revealing a journal bound in faded leather and several folded papers. The spirit of Naira for Joe was certain now. That's who she was, nodded encouragingly. Joe opened the journal to the first page where flowing script spelled out a name, Naira Winters. Before she could read further, the door creaked open. Joe hastily rewrapped the bundle and slid it back into its hiding place, replacing the floorboard just as Sam entered. "Everything all right?" he asked, his gaze sharp. Joe stood brushing dust from her skirt. "Yes, just admiring your wife's things. They're quite special." Sam hung his coat by the door. Naira was special. The name confirmation sent a shiver down Joe's spine. "How long has she been gone?" "Year and a half now." His voice was flat, controlled. "Fever took her fast. I'm sorry for your loss." Sam nodded once, then moved to stoke the fire. Joe noticed his hands were large but gentle in their movements, a working man's hands that knew how to be careful. "Mr. Winters," Joe began. "About Matthew Dalton." "There is no Matthew Dalton," Sam interrupted, not looking up from the fire. "At least not the one who wrote to you." Joe's stomach tightened. "I don't understand." Sam sighed, straightening. "Matthew Dalton is a 16-year-old boy who works for me, sometimes tending the horses. Has a habit of taking mail that's not his. Fancies himself a matchmaker, I suppose." The humiliation was like a slap. "So there never was a position or a ranch or—" "No, ma'am, I'm sorry." Joe turned away, blinking back sudden tears. She'd come all this way for nothing, again. "But—" Lily's small voice came from the curtained alcove. She stood in her nightgown, clutching her doll. "But Mama said she was coming." Sam's expression softened. "Lily girl, we've talked about this. Your mama is in heaven now." "But I see her," Lily insisted, "and she said Joe would come to help us." Joe's breath caught. She looked at the space just behind Lily where Naira's spirit now stood, one transparent hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. Sam knelt before Lily. "It's just dreams, sweetheart. Your mama loved you very much, and sometimes you dream about her because you miss her. It's not dreams." Lily's lower lip trembled. "She's here right now. She's standing right there." She pointed to where Naira's spirit stood. Sam looked, seeing nothing but empty air. His expression was a mixture of patience and sadness. "Come on back to bed." "But Papa." "No more Lily, it's late." As Sam guided Lily back to bed, Joe remained frozen, her mind racing. The child could see spirits just as she could, and Naira's ghost had somehow orchestrated her coming here. But why later, when the cabin was quiet and Sam had retired to his bedroll by the fire, Joe lay awake in the borrowed bed, staring at the ceiling. The events of the day tumbled through her mind like leaves in a storm. She had come seeking a husband, a safe harbor from the whispers and rejections. Instead, she'd found a widower and his daughter, a child with the same curse Joe had carried since childhood, and a ghost with unknown intentions. Joe closed her eyes, but sleep remained elusive. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the eaves with a sound almost like words, "Stay." Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through frost-covered windows. Joe woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet movement in the cabin. For a moment she was disoriented, then the events of the previous day rushed back. She dressed quickly, smoothing her hair and pinching her cheeks for color. When she emerged from behind the curtain, she found Sam at the stove frying bacon. Lily sat at the table drawing on a slate. "Good morning," Joe said. Lily looked up, face brightening. "Joe, you didn't leave?" "Not yet, little one." Joe smiled, taking the seat Lily patted eagerly beside her. Sam placed a mug of coffee before Joe. "Sleep all right?" "Yes, thank you." It wasn't entirely true. Joe had tossed and turned, haunted by Naira's presence and the mystery of why she'd been drawn here. "I've made arrangements for you to return to Fort Union," Sam said, turning back to the stove. "Johnson's wagon is heading that way tomorrow with supplies." "Oh." Joe stared into her coffee. The thought of returning to Fort Union, to the whispers and isolation, made her stomach clench. "That's very kind." "It's no trouble." "But she can't go," Lily protested, dropping her chalk. "Mama said she's supposed to stay with us." Sam's shoulders tensed. "Lily, it's true, Mama's right there and she's shaking her head. She doesn't want Joe to leave." Joe looked to where Lily pointed. Sure enough, Naira's spirit stood by the fireplace, her expression urgent. "Lily, enough." Sam's voice was firm, but not unkind. "Miss Tremaine has her own life, her own plans. She was tricked into coming here by that foolish Dalton boy, and now she needs to go home. But no more please. Lily's eyes filled with tears. She jumped up from the table and ran behind the curtain to her bed, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Joe set down her coffee. Mr. Winters, Sam, your daughter isn't making this up. Sam's gaze sharpened. What do you mean? Joe took a deep breath. She rarely shared this part of herself, but the child's distress moved her. I can see her too, your wife. Sam went very still. That's not funny, Miss Tremaine. I'm not joking. I've seen spirits all my life. Most people don't understand. They call it witchcraft or madness. But it's neither. It's just something I was born with. Joe held his gaze steadily. Your Lily has it too. Sam turned away, his movements stiff as he removed the bacon from the skillet. My daughter has an active imagination and misses her mother. That's all. She told me things she couldn't know. Joe pressed gently. Yesterday at the station before you arrived, she asked if I could see her mama too. Stop. Sam's voice was like steel. I don't know what game you're playing, but I won't have it. Not with my daughter's grief. Joe flinched at his tone. I understand your skepticism, truly, but please consider that Lily might be telling the truth, that she really does see her mother. Sam placed his hands flat on the table, leaning forward. My wife is dead, Miss Tremaine, dead and buried beneath the cedar tree behind our home. She's not standing by the fireplace or anywhere else, and filling my daughter's head with such nonsense is cruel. Before Joe could respond, a small sob came from behind the curtain. Lily stood there, tears streaming down her face. Why don't you believe me, Papa? I'm not lying. Sam's expression crumpled. He crossed to Lily, kneeling before her. I know you're not lying, sweetheart. You believe you see her. But it's just... She's wearing the blue dress with the beads, Lily said fiercely. The one she made for special days. And she has flowers in her hair, like when you got married. Sam went pale. The blue dress was packed away in a trunk. Lily hadn't seen it since Naira's death. Joe spoke softly. There's a pouch of sage on the shelf. She used it for cleansing and protection. And there's something hidden beneath the floorboard under that shelf, a journal. Sam's head whipped around. How could you possibly know that? Because she showed me. Joe nodded toward the spirit only she and Lily could see. Last night when you were in the barn. Sam stood slowly, his expression unreadable. He walked to the shelf, knelt, and removed the loose floorboard, revealing the wrapped bundle Joe had discovered the night before. His hands trembled as he unwrapped it. I've never shown this to anyone. Never even told anyone about it. I know. Joe moved to stand beside him. I'm not trying to upset you or Lily, but I think your wife wants me to help you somehow. That's why she led me here. Sam looked up at her, conflict evident in his eyes. This is madness. Perhaps, but it's real. Joe glanced at Naira's spirit, which now stood beside them. What does she want me to see? Sam stared at the journal in his hands, then slowly extended it to Joe. If this is some elaborate trick, it's not. Joe took the journal carefully. I promise you. With Sam and Lily watching intently, Joe opened the journal to a page that seemed to glow faintly to her sensitive sight. The handwriting was delicate but firm. April 12, 1882. Thomas Blackwood came again today. He says there's silver beneath our land and offers to buy, but his eyes are cold and I do not trust him. Sam says we need not sell, that this land is ours fair and square. But Blackwood has power in this territory, and I fear what he might do if denied. I've hidden the original deed where no one will find it. If anything happens to me, Sam must know the truth. Blackwood's claim is false. This land was paid for in full. Joe looked up at Sam. Who is Thomas Blackwood? Sam's expression had darkened. Cattle baron, owns half the territory or thinks he does. Been trying to buy our land for years. And the deed she mentions. I don't know anything about that. I have the deed right here. Sam moved to a small desk in the corner, removing a document from a drawer. Purchased from the railroad company 5 years ago. Joe studied the paper, then returned to the journal, flipping through the pages until another entry caught her eye. May 30th, 1882. I've been unwell. Strange dreams plague my sleep, a woman with copper skin and eyes that see beyond. She stands at a crossroads waiting. I believe she's the one who will help when the time comes. I must find her before Blackwood acts on his threats. Joe's hands trembled. The description matched her exactly. "It was me," she whispered. "She was dreaming about me." Sam took the journal back, his skepticism visibly warring with the evidence before him. "This is... I can't..." Lily tugged at Joe's skirt. "See, Mama knew Joe was coming. She told me so." Sam rubbed a hand over his face. "I need air." He strode to the door, grabbing his coat. "I'll be in the barn." The door closed behind him with finality, leaving Joe and Lily alone with Naira's watchful spirit. "He's scared," Lily said with the simple wisdom of children. "He doesn't like being scared." Joe knelt to the child's level. "It's a lot to understand, even for grown-ups." "But you believe me?" Lily's eyes, so like her father's, searched Joe's face. "Yes, I do, because I see her too." Lily's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Will you stay?" "Please, Mama says it's important." Joe glanced at Naira's spirit, which nodded encouragingly. Whatever had drawn her here, whatever purpose Naira had in reaching across the veil, it wasn't finished. "I'll stay a little while," Joe promised, "until we understand what your mama wants us to know." Sam spent most of the day in the barn, emerging only for a quiet midday meal before disappearing again. Joe respected his need for space instead, focusing on Lily, who was delighted to have someone who believed her. Together, they explored the cabin and its surroundings, Lily proudly showing Joe her favorite hiding spots and the tree where a family of squirrels lived. All the while, Naira's spirit drifted nearby, occasionally guiding them with subtle gestures. In the afternoon, Joe helped Lily gather eggs from the small chicken coop. As they worked, Joe gently questioned the child about her ability to see spirits. "When did you first notice your mama after she went to heaven?" Lily considered this, carefully placing an egg in her basket. "Right away. She was at her own funeral, standing next to her bed of flowers. She was crying because Papa was so sad." Joe nodded. "And does she speak to you?" "Sometimes. Mostly she just shows me things," or nods and shakes her head. Lily looked up at Joe. "Can you talk to her?" "Not exactly. It's like you said, mostly they show rather than tell." Joe hesitated. "Are there others you can see?" "Besides your mama," Lily nodded solemnly. "There's an old man who sits by the creek sometimes, and a lady with no name who walks through our field at night." The casual way Lily described these apparitions made Joe's heart ache. She recognized the child's gift for what it was, the same burden she herself had carried since childhood. A burden that had cost her 3 engagements and countless friendships. "Lily, you know that most people can't see what we see, right? Like Papa." "Yes, like your Papa. They don't understand, and sometimes they get frightened by it." Lily's brow furrowed. "Why would they be scared?" Joe chose her words carefully. "People fear what they don't understand. It might be best if you don't talk about seeing spirits to anyone except me and your Papa. At least for now." "But it's not bad, is it, seeing Mama?" "No, sweetheart. It's not bad at all. It's a gift, but a private one." As they headed back to the cabin with their eggs, Naira's spirit suddenly grew agitated, moving ahead of them and pointing urgently toward the road. Joe followed her gaze. A cloud of dust marked the approach of riders, 3 men on horseback moving at a steady pace toward the homestead. Lily clutched Joe's skirt. "It's him," she whispered. "The bad man." "Who, Lily?" "Mr. Blackwood. Mama is afraid of him." Cold dread settled in Joe's stomach. She took Lily's hand. "Come on, let's find your Papa." They hurried to the barn where Sam was repairing a bridle. He looked up as they entered, his expression softening slightly at the sight of his daughter before hardening again when he saw Joe. "Riders coming," Joe said without preamble. 3 of them. Lily thinks one might be Blackwood." Sam's hand stilled. "How would Lily know that?" "Mama told me," Lily said. "She says he's coming to make trouble." Sam set down the bridle, moving to the barn door to peer out. His shoulders tensed at the sight of the approaching men. "It's him, all right." He turned back to them, face grim. "Lily, go with Miss Tremaine to the house. Stay inside no matter what you hear." "But Papa..." "No arguments. Go." His tone brooked no debate. Joe took Lily's hand again. "Come on, little one. Your Papa knows what he's doing." As they crossed the yard to the cabin, Joe could feel Naira's presence close behind them, urgent and protective. Inside, Joe guided Lily to a chair. then moved to the window watching as the riders approached. The man in the lead sat tall in his saddle, late 50s, with iron gray hair and a beard trimmed to precision. His clothes were expensive, from his polished boots to his black hat. Everything about him spoke of wealth and the confidence it brought. Thomas Blackwood. The two men flanking him were clearly hired hands, rough-looking fellows with weathered faces and gun belts worn low on their hips. Sam emerged from the barn, standing squarely in the yard as the riders approached. Even from a distance, Joe could see the tension in his stance. Blackwood reined his horse to a stop a few yards from Sam. "Winters," he called, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Fine day for a ride." "What do you want, Blackwood?" Sam's voice was level, controlled. Blackwood dismounted with the ease of a man half his age. "Now, is that any way to greet a neighbor? I was just passing by. Thought I'd check on you and the little girl. How is she?" "She's fine. We're fine." Sam didn't move from his position. "Glad to hear it." Blackwood removed his gloves, slapping them against his palm. "Though I hear you've been having some financial difficulties. Shame about that loan coming due." Joe saw Sam's back stiffen. "What loan?" Blackwood produced a folded paper from his coat. "This loan, from the bank in Helena. Seems you're behind on your payments." "That's impossible. I paid that off last year." "Not according to this." Blackwood unfolded the paper, holding it out. "Bank's calling it in. All of it." Sam took the document, scanning it with growing disbelief. "This is fraud. I have the receipt showing payment in full." Blackwood shrugged, an insincere smile playing at his lips. "Banks make mistakes, but until you can prove otherwise, they're within their rights to seize the property as collateral." "This is my land." Sam's voice had dropped dangerously low. "Paid for fair and square." "Was your land," Blackwood corrected. "Now it's bank property. And as it happens, I've made them an offer they're inclined to accept." He gestured to his men. "These gentlemen are here to help you pack your things. You have until sundown tomorrow." Inside the cabin, Joe felt cold fury building in her chest. Beside her, Naira's spirit had grown more visible, her form pulsing with anger. "He's lying," Lily whispered, pressing against Joe's side. "Mama says he's a snake with two tongues." Outside, Sam had gone very still. "I won't leave." Blackwood sighed theatrically. "I was afraid you'd say that." He nodded to one of his men, who dismounted and moved towards Sam. Joe couldn't stand by any longer. She opened the cabin door and stepped onto the porch. "Mr. Blackwood," she called, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." All eyes turned to her. Blackwood's expression registered surprise, then interest, as he took in her appearance. "And who might you be, miss?" "Josephine Tremaine." Joe descended the porch steps, moving to stand beside Sam. "A friend of the family?" Sam shot her a warning glance, which she ignored. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, Miss Tremaine, I'm afraid this is a private matter between Mr. Winters and the bank." "Is it?" Joe maintained a calm demeanor, though her heart raced. "Because I find it curious that a cattle baron such as yourself would be handling bank business personally, unless, of course, you have some particular interest in this land." A flash of annoyance crossed Blackwood's features before his smile reasserted itself. "I'm simply a concerned neighbor." "I see." Joe nodded thoughtfully. "And this loan document, may I?" She held out her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Sam passed her the paper. Joe studied it carefully, noting the signature at the bottom. "Interesting," she murmured. "Mr. Winters, do you recognize this signature as your own?" Sam leaned closer. "No, that's not my handwriting." "I thought not." Joe handed the document back to Blackwood. "I believe you'll find, sir, that this paper has no legal standing. The signature is forged." Blackwood's smile faltered. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Tremaine." "It is indeed. One that the territorial magistrate would likely be very interested in." Joe held his gaze steadily, especially when presented with Mr. Winters' receipt of payment and examples of his actual signature. A tense silence fell. Blackwood's men shifted uncomfortably, hands drifting toward their gun belts. Sam moved subtly, positioning himself between Joe and the hired guns. Finally, Blackwood chuckled, though the sound held no warmth. "You're quite the advocate, Miss Tremaine, but I think you'll find the territories favor established businessmen over mixed-blood squatters." The slur hit Joe like a physical blow, but she refused to show it. "Perhaps, or perhaps they'll be interested in other matters concerning you, Mr. Blackwood." The mysterious illness of Mrs. Winters, for instance. Blackwood's face darkened. Mind your tongue, woman. Naira Winters died of fever. Everyone knows that. Did she? Joe felt Naira's spirit move closer, lending her strength. Or was it something in her tea, something that mimicked fever but worked much faster? Sam's head whipped toward Joe, shock evident in his expression. Blackwood's hand moved to the pistol at his hip. That's enough. I came here on legitimate business, not to be accused by some half-breed witch. One of his men stepped forward, his expression ugly. Want us to teach her some manners, boss? That won't be necessary, came a new voice. All turned to see an older man on horseback approaching from the road. He wore a sheriff's badge on his vest and carried a shotgun across his saddle. Sheriff Jenkins, Blackwood greeted, his tone carefully modulated. What brings you out this way? Heard you were paying a visit to the Winters place. Jenkins dismounted, his movements deliberate. Thought I'd see what business you had. Just discussing a bank matter. Blackwood folded the loan document, tucking it into his coat. Nothing that concerns the law. Jenkins' gaze traveled from Blackwood to Sam, then to Joe. That's so, Winters. Sam nodded stiffly. Mr. Blackwood was just leaving. The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't press. Then I'll escort him and his men back to town. Make sure they don't get lost. Blackwood's smile was tight. No need for that, Sheriff. We know the way. He turned to Sam, all pretense of friendliness gone. This isn't over, Winters. Not by a long shot. His gaze shifted to Joe, cold as winter. And you, Miss Tremaine, you'd do well to remember that strangers don't last long in these parts. With that, he mounted his horse and wheeled around, his men following suit. The three riders galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Jenkins watched them go, then turned to Sam. You all right? Fine. Sam's voice was clipped. Thanks for stopping by, Sheriff. Jenkins nodded, though his expression remained concerned. Heard you had a visitor. He glanced at Joe. Miss. Joe inclined her head. Mr. Jenkins, you staying long in Pine Creek? Before Joe could answer, Sam spoke. She's a family friend, visiting for a while. Jenkins studied them both, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. Finally, he shrugged. We'll keep an eye out. Blackwood doesn't make threats lightly. We'll be careful, Sam assured him. After the sheriff had ridden away, Sam turned to Joe, his expression a storm of confusion and anger. Inside. Now. Joe followed him into the cabin where Lily waited anxiously. The moment she saw them, she ran to her father, throwing her arms around his waist. I was scared, she confessed into the fabric of his shirt. Sam's expression softened as he stroked his daughter's hair. It's all right, Lily girl. Everything's fine. When Lily had calmed, Sam sent her to gather eggs that had been forgotten in the confrontation. Once she was out of earshot, he rounded on Joe. What in God's name was that? How could you possibly know about the tea, about Naira being poisoned? His voice was low but intense. I never told anyone my suspicions, not even the sheriff. Joe met his gaze squarely. Naira told me, or rather showed me. She nodded to where Naira's spirit stood by the window watching them. Last night she led me to her journal. This morning while you were in the barn, I read more of it. She suspected Blackwood was poisoning her, slowly adding something to her tea when he visited. Sam sank into a chair, his face ashen. I thought I was going mad. After she died, I kept thinking it wasn't right. Fever doesn't take someone that fast, not someone young and strong like Naira. But the doctor said it was natural causes, and who was I to argue? She wrote about it, Joe said gently. In her last entry, she knew she was dying, knew it was Blackwood's doing, but she couldn't prove it. Sam's hands clenched into fists on the table. Why would he kill her for the land, the silver she mentioned in her journal? Joe sat across from him. She knew about the silver deposit on your property. Blackwood wants it, and she refused to let him have it. Silver? Sam looked genuinely confused. There's no silver here, just good grazing land. Naira seems certain, and given how determined Blackwood is to get this property, Joe trailed off. Sam shook his head. Even if there is silver, it doesn't matter. This is our home. I won't sell not for any price. Then we need to find that deed Naira mentioned, the original one, and we need proof that Blackwood forged your signature on that loan document. Sam looked up sharply at her use of we. This isn't your fight, Miss Tremaine. Joe, she corrected softly. And maybe it is. Maybe this is why I was meant to come here. Sam studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You really believe that Naira somehow called you here from beyond the grave? I do. Joe held his gaze. I've seen spirits all my life, Mr. Winters. Most are lost confused, but some have purpose, unfinished business. Your wife has been trying to protect you and Lily even after death. Sam's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I couldn't protect her. I was away when she got sick. By the time I got back, it wasn't your fault, Joe said gently. Blackwood is clever. He made it look like natural causes. Sam rubbed a hand over his face. How can I believe any of this ghosts' visions, silver mines? It's madness. Sometimes the truth is stranger than anything we could imagine. Joe leaned forward. But right now, what matters is keeping you and Lily safe. Blackwood will be back, and next time the sheriff might not arrive so conveniently. Sam was quiet for a long time, struggling with everything he'd heard. Finally, he nodded slowly. Right, for Lily's sake, I'll try to believe. What do we do next? We find that original deed, and we learn everything we can about Thomas Blackwood. Joe felt Naira's presence grow stronger, approving. Together. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the promise of winter's first snow. Within the cabin, something else stirred, a tentative alliance, born of necessity and shared purpose. And perhaps, though neither would admit it, yet something more. Night fell early, the autumn sun surrendering to darkness. Sam built up the fire while Joe prepared a simple supper of salt pork, potatoes, and biscuits. Lily helped set the table, chattering excitedly about the day's events, seemingly untroubled by the confrontation with Blackwood. And then Joe was so brave, Papa. She stood right up to the bad man. Lily's eyes shone with admiration, just like in the stories. Sam's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. Yes, she was brave. Too brave, maybe. Joe felt heat rise to her cheeks at his words. I just couldn't stand by while he threatened you. Still, Sam passed her a plate. Thank you. Most folks around here wouldn't cross Blackwood for any reason. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the clink of utensils against plates. Lily kept glancing at the empty chair beside her, occasionally smiling at something only she could see. After the meal, when Lily had been tucked into bed, Joe and Sam sat before the fire, mugs of coffee warming their hands. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Storm's coming, Sam observed, his gaze on the flames. First big snow, most likely. Joe nodded, watching the firelight play across his features. In the soft glow, the scar on his cheek seemed less harsh, more a part of him than a mark of violence. May I ask how you got that? She gestured to the scar. Sam's hand rose to his face, fingers tracing the old wound. War was with the 7th Cavalry for a time. Joe stiffened slightly. The 7th Cavalry was notorious for its campaigns against the native tribes, including her mother's people. Sam noticed her reaction. I left before Little Bighorn, if that's what you're wondering. Couldn't stomach it anymore. What happened? Joe asked quietly. Sam was silent for so long, Joe thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, weighted with memory. We were ordered to raid a Kiowa village. Intelligence said they were harboring warriors who'd attacked a settlement. But when we got there, he shook his head. There were no warriors, just women, children, old men. Some of the officers wanted to proceed anyway. Make an example. Joe's throat tightened. And you? I refused. Sam's eyes remained fixed on the fire. Got this for my trouble. He indicated the scar. Lieutenant gave it to me with his saber when I stepped between him and a woman holding a baby. The revelation struck Joe like a physical blow. A Kiowa woman. Sam nodded. Young, couldn't have been more than 17. She was pregnant, due any day from the look of her. I couldn't, his voice caught. I couldn't let them hurt her. Joe's heart pounded against her ribs. What happened to her, the woman? I helped her escape. Got her to a missionary family near Fort Union before the baby came. Sam finally looked at Joe. Why? Joe couldn't speak. The room seemed to spin around her. It couldn't be. The coincidence was too great, too impossible. Joe, what is it? Sam leaned forward, concerned. Joe had to clear her throat. When was this raid? Spring of '58, April, I think. 25 years ago, the same month Joe had been born. And the woman's name? Her voice was barely a whisper. Sam frowned, trying to remember. Nikita, I think, or Namid, something with an N. Nimki, Joe breathed. Her name was Nimki. Sam went very still. How could you possibly know that? Joe's hands trembled so badly she had to set down her mug. Because Nimki was my mother, and I was the baby she was carrying. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to pause its howling. Sam stared at Joe, shock written across his features. That's not possible. I was born at the Green Valley Mission near Fort Union in late April 1858, Joe said quietly. My mother died in childbirth. The missionaries raised me until I was 7, then sent me to a school for half-Indian children. They told me my mother had been rescued by a soldier with a scarred face. She met his gaze. You saved my mother's life. And mine. Sam stood abruptly, pacing to the window. His reflection in the dark glass was ghostly insubstantial. All these years, he murmured, I wondered what happened to her, to the baby. And now you know. Joe remained seated, giving him space to process. I lived. Because of you. Sam turned back to her, his expression haunted. If I'd gotten there sooner, she might have lived too. You can't know that. Joe stood, moving toward him slowly. What matters is that you tried. You risked everything to save strangers. And here you are. Sam's voice held wonder. 25 years later, standing in my home. How is that possible? Joe glanced to where Naira's spirit watched from the corner, her expression serene. Perhaps nothing is truly coincidence. Sam followed her gaze, seeing nothing but empty air. You think Naira knew about our connection? I don't know, maybe she sensed something. Joe was close enough now to see the flecks of gold in Sam's blue-green eyes. What I do know is that I'm grateful. To her for calling me here, and to you for what you did all those years ago. Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Sam looked away, moving back to the fire. It's late, he said, his voice rough, and tomorrow will bring its own troubles. Joe nodded, understanding his need to retreat. Good night, then. As she turned toward the curtained alcove, Sam's voice stopped her. Joe. She looked back at him. I'm glad you're here, he said simply. Whatever brought you. Joe smiled softly. So am I. That night, Joe dreamed of her mother, not a spirit glimpsed from beyond, but a memory never lived. Nimki ran through tall grass, laughing, her belly swollen with child. Behind her, the sky was on fire, but she wasn't afraid. A man with a scarred face watched over her, and beside him stood a Comanche woman with flowers in her hair, her gentle hands guiding them all towards safety. Stay, the wind whispered through her dreams. You belong here. And for the first time in her life, Joe believed it might be true. Dawn arrived with the first snow of winter, delicate flakes drifting down from a pearl-gray sky. Joe stood on the porch, a woolen shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, watching as the world transformed. The fields, the distant trees, the barn roof all gradually disappeared beneath a blanket of pristine white. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. Sam stepped out, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. He offered one to Joe without a word. Thank you, she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. The warmth seeped through her gloves, a welcome contrast to the chill air. Sam leaned against the porch railing, his gaze fixed on the falling snow. Johnson won't be making the trip to Fort Union in this weather. Joe glanced at him. I see. Means you're stuck here, for a few days at least. Is that a problem? Joe asked carefully. Sam took a long sip of his coffee before answering. No, not a problem. They stood in silence, the soft hush of snowfall filling the space between them. Last night's revelation that Sam had saved Joe's mother 25 years ago hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. About what I told you last night, Joe began. You don't need to explain, Sam interrupted. It's a lot to take in. For both of us, Joe agreed. I never thought I'd meet the man who saved my mother. My life. Sam's expression remained unreadable. Life has a strange way of circling back on itself. Do you think it's a coincidence? Joe asked. My coming here after all these years? I don't know what to think anymore. Sam's gaze drifted toward the window where Lily's small face was pressed against the glass, watching the snow with delight. But Lily believes you were meant to be here. And after yesterday? Blackwood, Joe nodded. He'll be back. Yes, Sam's jaw tightened. And next time he won't just bring papers. Joe studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the scar that told its own story of courage, the weariness in his eyes. A good man who had already lost too much. "We'll be ready," she said firmly. Sam turned to her, surprise flickering across his features. I told you last night, I'm not going anywhere." Joe met his gaze steadily. "Not until Blackwood is dealt with." Something shifted in Sam's eyes, doubt giving way to cautious acceptance. He nodded once. "Bombs. Then we'd better find that deed Naira hid and figure out where she got the idea there's silver on this land." As if summoned by their conversation, Naira's spirit appeared beside them, her form more distinct in the crystalline air. She pointed urgently toward the barn. "She wants us to go to the barn," Joe said quietly. Sam followed her gaze, seeing nothing but empty air. His expression betrayed his internal struggle, a rational man trying to accept the irrational. "All right," he said finally. "Let's see what she has to show us." The barn was cold but sheltered from the snow, smelling of hay and horses. Two bay geldings nickered softly from their stalls as Sam and Joe entered, stomping their hooves against the packed earth floor. "What exactly are we looking for?" Sam asked, lighting a lantern that cast long shadows across the interior. Joe watched as Naira's spirit drifted toward the back of the barn, where a ladder led to a hayloft. "Up there, I think." Sam hung the lantern on a hook and climbed the ladder first, testing each rung before putting his full weight on it. Joe followed her skirts, making the ascent awkward. At the top, Sam offered his hand, pulling her up the last few feet with surprising strength. The hayloft was half full, golden straw piled against the far wall. Naira hovered near the corner where the roof beams met. "There," Joe pointed. "The corner." Sam moved carefully across the loft, mindful of weak spots in the flooring. He knelt by the corner, running his hands along the rough, wooden beams. "I don't see anything unusual." "Look higher," Joe suggested, following Naira's gestures, "where the beams join the roof." Sam stretched upward, his fingers exploring the seam where vertical support met horizontal rafter. Something dislodged a small, cloth-wrapped bundle that fell into the hay with a soft thud. He retrieved it, unwrapping the oilcloth carefully. Inside lay a metal container, the kind soldiers used to carry documents during the war. It was sealed with wax around the edges. "Naira's father was Comanche," Sam said softly, "but her mother was Mexican. This was her grandfather's a captain in the Mexican army." Sam broke the seal and opened the container. Inside were several folded papers, yellowed with age but well preserved. He spread them out on a relatively clean patch of hay. The first was a land deed dated 5 years earlier than the one Sam possessed. It showed a much larger parcel of land than his current property, extending south into what was now Blackwood's range. "This is the original survey," Sam murmured, tracing the boundaries with his finger, before the territorial lines were redrawn. The second document was a geological survey with notations in faded ink. One area within the original boundaries, but now on Blackwood's side of the line, was circled repeatedly. "Silver deposit," Joe read aloud. "Estimated value, substantial." "This must be what Blackwood is after," Sam said. "But it's not even on my land anymore. It's on his." Unless, Joe studied the documents more closely. The third paper is a letter from the Territorial Land Office. It says the boundary adjustment was never officially ratified by Congress. Technically, according to federal law, all this land is still yours. Sam sat back on his heels, stunned. That's impossible. The boundaries were redrawn 4 years ago. Everyone accepted it. "Everyone except Naira," Joe said softly. "She must have discovered these documents, realized the silver was rightfully yours. That's why Blackwood wanted your land so badly, not for what's under your current property, but to legitimize his claim to what he's already mining. If he's been mining silver on land that's legally mine," Sam's voice hardened, "that's theft on a massive scale. Enough to ruin him if it became public," Joe agreed. "No wonder he was willing to kill, to keep it secret." Sam carefully refolded the documents, his expression grim. "We need to get these to the territorial judge in Helena. He's the only one with authority to enforce the original boundaries." "Helena is a 3-day ride in good weather," Joe pointed out. "In this snow, it could take a week or more." "We don't have a choice. Sheriff Jenkins is a good man, but he doesn't have the authority to take on Blackwood with just these papers. We need a federal ruling." Joe nodded, her mind racing. "Blackwood doesn't know we have these. He still thinks he can force you off your land with that forged loan document." Which buys us some time, Sam agreed, but not much. He'll be back soon, probably with more men. A soft whinnying from below drew their attention. Through a gap in the floorboards, Joe could see Lily had entered the barn, bundled in a too large coat, her breath fogging in the cold air. "Papa," she called. "Joe, are you up there?" "We're coming down, Lily girl," Sam called back, tucking the documents inside his coat. To Joe, he murmured, "Not a word about this to her. She's too young to keep secrets." Joe nodded in agreement. "She's worried enough as it is." They descended the ladder carefully. Lily waited below, her cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. "It's snowing so hard," she exclaimed. "Can we build a snow fort, please, Papa?" Sam's stern expression softened at his daughter's enthusiasm. "It's coming down pretty hard, sweetheart. Maybe when it lets up a bit." "But what if it stops?" Lily's lower lip protruded in a pout. "It won't stop anytime soon," Sam assured her, ruffling her blonde curls. "This is just the beginning. We'll have plenty of snow for forts." Joe knelt to Lily's level. "How about we go inside and make some hot chocolate, and I can teach you a special Kiowa snow song?" Lily's eyes widened. "A snow song, what's that?" "It's a song my mother's people sang to welcome the first snow of winter," Joe explained. "It's supposed to bring good luck for the cold months ahead." "Can Mama learn it too?" Lily asked innocently. Joe glanced up to where Naira's spirit hovered nearby, a gentle smile on her transparent face. "I think she already knows it in her own way." Lily slipped her small hand into Joe's. "Will you stay for all the snow days? There's lots of them in winter." The simple question caught Joe off guard. She looked to Sam, unsure how to answer. "Miss Tremaine has her own life, Lily," Sam said gently. "Back in Fort Union." "But she belongs here," Lily insisted. "Mama said so." An awkward silence fell. Finally, Joe squeezed Lily's hand. "Let's take one day at a time, shall we? For now I'm here, and there's hot chocolate to be made." This seemed to satisfy Lily, who tugged Joe toward the barn door. Sam followed, pausing to extinguish the lantern. As they crossed the snowy yard back to the cabin, Joe was acutely aware of his presence behind her. Solid, watchful man carrying the weight of too many responsibilities. And now she was one of them. The day passed quietly, the snowfall intensifying as afternoon faded into evening. Joe taught Lily the snow song, as promised, the child's clear voice rising and falling with the ancient melody. Sam watched from his chair by the fire, his expression softening whenever Lily looked his way, hardening again when she turned back to Joe. After supper, when Lily had been tucked into bed, Sam placed the discovered documents on the table between them. "We need a plan," he said without preamble. "Someone has to take these to Helena." Joe nodded. "You can't go, Blackwood would follow you, and Lily can't be left alone." "And you can't go either," Sam countered. "A woman traveling alone in this weather would draw attention, especially with someone in a half-Indian woman." Joe finished for him, no rancor in her voice. It was simply fact. Sam had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I was going to say especially a stranger to these parts." "The result is the same," Joe said pragmatically. "Neither of us can go, and we can't send Lily." "There's Johnson," Sam suggested. "He makes the supply run to Fort Union. He's trustworthy." "But would he be willing to go all the way to Helena? That's a significant detour, especially in this weather." Sam rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "For the right price, maybe. I have some savings set aside." "And if Blackwood's men are watching the roads," Joe pressed, "they'd stop anyone leaving from your property." "You're right." Sam's frustration was evident. "We're trapped here until the weather clears, and by then Blackwood will have made his move." Joe reached for Naira's journal, which lay on the table. She had been reading it throughout the day, seeking any clues the dead woman might have left behind. "Naira mentions a man named Whitefeather in her later entries," Joe said, flipping to the relevant page. "A Crow Scout who helped her gather information about Blackwood. She trusted him." "Joseph Whitefeather." Sam nodded. "He guided us when we first settled here. Lives up in the hills now, keeps to himself mostly." "Could he take the documents to Helena?" "Maybe, if we could get word to him." Sam's brow furrowed. "But his camp is a day's ride from here, and with this snow—" "We have to try something," Joe insisted. "Every day we wait is another day Blackwood has to plan his next move." Sam studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense. "Why are you doing this, Joe, getting involved in our troubles? You could have gone back to Fort Union, stayed safe." The question caught her off guard. Why indeed, and she barely knew these people had stumbled into their lives by chance, or perhaps by Naira's design. Yet the thought of returning to her solitary existence in Fort Union felt impossible now. "I've spent my whole life running," she said finally, "from who I am, from what I can do. Always hiding, always afraid of being found out." She met his gaze steadily. "For once I want to stand and fight. For something that matters. And we matter." Sam's voice was low, careful. "Lily and me. Yes." The simple truth of it surprised even Joe. "You do." Something shifted in Sam's eyes, a softening, a recognition. For a heartbeat, Joe thought he might reach for her hand where it rested on the table. Instead, he stood abruptly. "It's late. We should get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to reach Whitefeather." Joe nodded, trying to ignore the small pang of disappointment. "Good night, then." As she moved toward the curtained alcove, Sam's voice stopped her. "Joe." She turned back to him. "Thank you." The words seemed difficult for him, for caring about what happens to us. Joe smiled softly. "Get some sleep, Sam. Tomorrow will come soon enough." Morning broke clear and cold, the snow having stopped sometime in the night. The world outside the cabin windows was transformed, pristine white, and as far as the eye could see, tree bowed under the weight of snow, the distant mountains sharp against a sky of perfect blue. Joe woke to the sound of Lily's excited voice and the smell of coffee brewing. She dressed quickly, pinning her long black hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. When she emerged from behind the curtain, she found Lily pressed against the window, pointing out animal tracks in the fresh snow to a patient Sam. "Good morning," Joe said, smoothing her skirt. Lily whirled around, face brightening. "Joe, come see. There are rabbit tracks and bird tracks and maybe even wolf tracks." Joe joined her at the window, making appropriate sounds of interest as Lily identified each set of prints. Over the child's head, she caught Sam's eye. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Well enough," Joe replied. In truth, her dreams had been troubled visions of Blackwood's men surrounding the cabin of Lily in danger of Sam. She pushed the thought away. "And you, Clem?" "Same." Sam handed her a mug of coffee. "I've been thinking about getting word to Whitefeather. And there's an old trapper's cabin about halfway to his camp. If I could get there, I might be able to leave a message. He checks it from time to time." "That's still half a day's ride in deep snow," Joe pointed out. "I know, but it might be our best chance." Lily tugged at Joe's skirt. "Can we build a snow fort now, please? You promised." Joe looked to Sam, who nodded slightly. "Go ahead. I need to check on the horses anyway." "Come on then," Joe said to Lily, setting down her coffee. "Let's get you bundled up properly first." Once Lily was wrapped in layers of wool and flannel, they ventured out into the brilliant morning. The snow reached past Lily's knees in places, making her giggle as she waded through it. Joe showed her how to pack snow into blocks, building a small fort near the edge of the yard where they could see anyone approaching from the road. As they worked, Lily chattered away, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "Papa says you might stay for a while. Is that true?" "For a little while, yes," Joe replied carefully. "Good." Lily patted a snow block into place. "I like having you here." Papa smiles more. Joe's hand stilled. "Does he?" "Mm-hmm. And he doesn't have the bad dreams as much." "Bad dreams?" Lily nodded solemnly. "He yells sometimes when he's sleeping, about the war and about Mama being sick. But last night he was quiet." Joe's heart ached for the man who carried such burdens and for the perceptive child who noticed far more than adults realized. "Your papa is very brave," Joe said gently. "He takes good care of you." "He's sad a lot, though." Lily looked up at Joe, her blue-green eyes serious. "Mama says he needs someone to take care of him, too." Before Joe could formulate a response to this startling statement, a sound caught her attention. Horses' hooves crunching through snow, approaching from the road. She straightened, shielding her eyes against the sun's glare on white. 3 riders appeared around the bend. Even at a distance, Joe recognized the lead figure's straight-back posture and silver-trimmed hat. Blackwood. "Lilies," Joe said calmly, though her heart raced. "I want you to go inside now, find your papa in the barn, and tell him Mr. Blackwood is here." Lily's eyes widened. "The bad man?" "Yes, sweetheart. Go quickly, but don't run. Act like we're just playing a game." Lily nodded, her expression suddenly grave beyond her years. She walked with exaggerated casualness toward the barn, only looking back once before slipping inside. Joe stood her ground as the riders approached, squaring her shoulders and lifting her chin. She would not show fear, not to a man like Blackwood. The three men reined their horses to a stop a few yards away. Blackwood smiled coldly down at her. "Miss Tremaine, still visiting, I see." "Mr. Blackwood," Joe acknowledged with a slight nod. "This is becoming a habit." Blackwood chuckled, though the sound held no warmth. "Indeed it is." He dismounted, handing his reins to one of his men. Today he wore a heavy bearskin coat that made his substantial frame even more imposing. "I thought perhaps you'd have returned to wherever it is you came from." "The snow has delayed my departure," Joe replied evenly. "Ah, yes, the snow." Blackwood glanced around the yard. "Quite heavy for this early in the season, almost as if the weather itself conspires to complicate matters." "What matters would those be, Mr. Blackwood?" His smile thinned. "Direct, aren't you? I like that in a woman. To answer your question, I've come to speak with Winters about our unfinished business." "I believe he made his position clear yesterday." "Yes. Well, circumstances have changed." Blackwood patted his coat pocket. "I've brought new papers, more persuasive ones." The barn door opened and Sam emerged, rifle in hand, though not raised. His expression was granite as he approached. "Blackwood," he said flatly, "you're trespassing." Now, Winters." Blackwood raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I've come to talk business, not to fight. You have your rifle, I have my men. Seems a standoff to me." "Say what you came to say, then leave," Sam growled. Blackwood sighed theatrically. "So hostile. Very well, I've come with a final offer." He withdrew an envelope from his coat. "Twice what your land is worth paid in fee. Today, you and your daughter can be on the eastbound train by sundown, start a new life anywhere you please." "Not interested," Sam said without hesitation. "Don't be hasty." Blackwood's voice hardened. "This is a generous offer, Winters. More generous than you deserve." "This is my home," Sam stated simply. "Not for sale, not at any price." Blackwood's affable mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Is it worth dying for? Is it worth your daughter growing up an orphan?" Joe stepped forward, unable to stay silent. "Is that a threat, Mr. Blackwood?" His gaze shifted to her eyes, narrowing. "It's a reality, Miss Tremaine. Life is uncertain in these territories. Accidents happen. Illness strikes. People disappear." "Like Naira Winters?" Joe asked boldly. Something dangerous flashed in Blackwood's eyes. "Mrs. Winters died of fever. A tragedy, but natural causes." "We both know that's not true," Joe countered. "Just as we both know what you're really after isn't this small ranch, but what lies beneath the adjusted territorial boundary." Blackwood went very still. His men exchanged confused glances, but he ignored them, focusing entirely on Joe. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Tremaine," he said softly, "making accusations you can't possibly prove." "Can't I?" Joe held his gaze steadily. "The original survey documents still exist, Mr. Blackwood, as does the letter from the land office stating the boundary adjustment was never ratified by Congress." The color drained from Blackwood's face. For the first time, Joe saw genuine fear in his eyes, quickly masked by fury. "You're bluffing," he hissed. "Am I?" Joe smiled thinly. "Care to risk your empire finding out?" Blackwood's hand moved toward his pistol, then stopped. His eyes darted to Sam's rifle, then back to Joe. Calculation replaced rage as he visibly composed himself. "If such documents existed," he said carefully, "a wise person would use them to negotiate, not threaten." "We're not interested in your money," Sam interjected. "Just leave us be." Blackwood laughed, a harsh sound like breaking glass. "You think it's that simple that I'll just ride away and forget what I've heard?" He shook his head. "No, Winters. This ends one of two ways: you sell to me willingly, or I take what's mine by other means." "It's not yours," Sam said flatly. "Never was." "We shall see." Blackwood remounted his horse with fluid grace despite his size. "You have until tomorrow noon. Accept my offer or face the consequences." His gaze shifted to Joe, cold as the snow surrounding them. "All of you." With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his men following close behind. When they had disappeared around the bend, Sam lowered his rifle, his knuckles white around the barrel. "You shouldn't have told him about the documents." I didn't tell him we had them, Joe pointed out, only that they exist. Now he knows we know about the silver mine. And he knows we're a threat that needs eliminating, Sam countered. He'll be back, Joe, with more men, tonight probably. Then we need to be ready. Joe's mind raced. We need to get Lily somewhere safe. There is nowhere safe, Sam said grimly. Not from Blackwood, not in this territory. The barn door creaked open again, and Lily peeked out. Are the bad men gone? Yes, sweetheart, Sam called, forcing his voice to sound normal. You can come out now. Lily ran to her father, wrapping her arms around his waist. Are they coming back? Sam exchanged a look with Joe over Lily's head. Don't worry about that now. How about you finish your snow fort? I need to talk to Miss Tremaine for a minute. Lily looked dubious. Promise you won't let the bad men take our home. Sam knelt, bringing himself eye level with his daughter. I promise, Lily girl. This is our home, and no one's going to take it from us. Seemingly satisfied, Lily returned to the half-built snow fort. Sam motioned for Joe to follow him into the barn out of earshot. We need to get those documents to Helena, he said urgently. It's our only chance. Blackwood will have men watching every road out of here, Joe reminded him. I know, but we have to try. Sam paced the length of the barn, agitated. If I leave tonight under cover of darkness, he'll follow you, Joe interrupted, and Lily and I will be left defenseless. Then what do you suggest? Sam demanded, frustration evident in his voice. Joe was quiet for a moment, thinking. The trapper's cabin you mentioned. Could Lily and I reach it on foot? Sam stared at her. What are you suggesting? You stay here, make it look like we're all still in the cabin. I take Lily and the documents to the trapper's cabin, leave the documents with a message for Whitefeather. Then we circle back through the woods. That's at least 5 miles through deep snow, Sam protested. Lily couldn't make it that far. She wouldn't have to walk the whole way. You said you have 2 horses. I could carry her most of the distance. Sam shook his head adamantly. It's too dangerous. If you got lost, or if Blackwood's men found you, it's a risk, Joe acknowledged. But staying here waiting for Blackwood to return with enough men to overwhelm us, that's a certainty, not a risk. Sam's jaw worked as he struggled with the decision. I don't like it. Neither do I, Joe said softly. But I can't see another way. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Sam sighed heavily. If, and I mean if, we consider this plan, we'd need to wait until full dark. And you'd need to know exactly where you're going. You could draw me a map, Joe suggested. And Naira, she hesitated, unsure how he would react to the mention of his dead wife's spirit. To her surprise, Sam nodded slowly. Naira knows the way. She used to visit the cabin, sometimes gather herbs in that area. He looked at Joe with something like wonder. I still can't quite believe I'm saying this, but if she's really here, really guiding you. She is, Joe assured him. She wants to protect you and Lily as much as I do. Something shifted in Sam's expression, a softening around the eyes, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. Why, Joe? Why risk yourself for us? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Because you saved my life once, Joe said simply, and now I have the chance to save yours. Sam held her gaze for a long moment. Then with deliberate slowness, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm despite the cold air. Be careful, he said, his voice low and intense. Both of you. Joe curled her fingers around his, feeling the strength there, the steadiness. We will. For a heartbeat, they stood connected, neither willing to break the fragile moment. Then a joyful shout from outside, Lily calling for them to see her completed snow fort, broke the spell. Sam released Joe's hand reluctantly. We should go back. Act normal for Lily's sake. Joe nodded, already missing the warmth of his touch. For Lily. As they left the barn, Joe felt Naira's presence beside her, a gentle pressure like a hand on her shoulder. The spirit's message was clear. Protect them. Keep them safe. I will, Joe whispered too softly for Sam to hear. I promise. The day passed with excruciating slowness, each of them playing their part in a carefully constructed facade of normalcy. They built snow forts with Lily-prepared meals, read stories by the fire. But underneath the domestic tranquility, preparations were being made. Sam cleaned and loaded his rifle and revolver, checking and rechecking the mechanisms. Joe packed a small bag with essentials, matches, dried meat, a compass, a knife. They spoke little, communicating mostly through glances and nods when Lily wasn't looking. As dusk approached, Sam took Lily onto his lap in the rocking chair by the fire. "I need to tell you something important, Lily girl." Lily looked up at him, immediately serious. "About the bad men." Sam nodded. "They might come back tonight, and if they do, I need you to be very brave." "I'm always brave," Lily declared with the confidence of a child who had not yet learned true fear. "I know you are." Sam smoothed her blonde curls. "But tonight you need to be extra brave. You and Joe are going on a special adventure." Lily's eyes widened. "An adventure in the dark." "Yes, a secret adventure. You'll need to be very quiet and do exactly what Joe tells you." "Will you come too, Papa?" Sam shook his head. "Not this time. I need to stay here and protect our home." Lily's lower lip trembled. "But what if the bad men hurt you?" "They won't," Sam assured her, though his eyes meeting Joe's over Lily's head held no such certainty. "I'll be fine, and in the morning we'll all be together again." Lily didn't look convinced. "Promise?" "I promise." Sam hugged her tightly. "Now how about one more story before your adventure begins?" As Sam read to Lily from her favorite book, Joe made final preparations. She dressed in her warmest clothes, a woolen dress with her heavy cloak over it, sturdy boots, thick gloves. Around her neck, she placed a small leather pouch containing protective herbs, sage, sweetgrass, cedar, a practice her Kiowa ancestors had followed for generations. Naira's spirit appeared beside her, more visible now in the fading light. She pointed to a small, carved box on the shelf, then to Joe's pouch. Understanding Joe opened the box. Inside lay a turquoise pendant on a leather cord, beautiful in its simplicity, the stone polished to a soft blue-green that reminded Joe of Sam's eyes. "Was this yours?" Joe whispered. Naira nodded, then pointed to Lily, miming placing it around a neck. "You want me to give it to Lily for protection?" Another nod, more emphatic this time. Joe took the pendant, feeling its weight in her palm. "I'll keep her safe," she promised. "I won't let anything happen to her." Naira's spirit smiled, a gesture so full of gratitude and trust that Joe felt tears prick at her eyes. Then the apparition faded, conserving strength for when she would be needed most. Outside, darkness fell completely. The moon, nearly full, cast silver light across the snow, creating deep shadows beneath trees and buildings. A perfect night for both concealment and illumination. "It's time," Sam said quietly, closing Lily's book. Joe nodded, steeling herself for what lay ahead. "I've saddled the gentler mare. She'll carry both of us without trouble." Sam stood Lily still in his arms. "Let's get you bundled up, little one." Together they dressed Lily in layers of warm clothing, wool leggings beneath her dress, 2 pairs of socks, a heavy coat, mittens, and a knitted cap pulled low over her ears. Through it all, the child remained solemn, understanding, in some fundamental way, that this was not a game. When she was fully dressed, Joe knelt before her, holding out Naira's pendant. "I have something special for you to wear tonight. It belonged to your mama." Lily's eyes widened. "Mama's necklace." "Yes, she wants you to have it to keep you safe on our journey." Joe placed the cord around Lily's neck, tucking the pendant beneath her coat. "It's a secret treasure just between us." Lily touched the hidden pendant reverently. "Is Mama coming with us?" "In her own way, yes," Joe said softly. "She'll be watching over us." Sam cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. "Time to go. Stay on the tree line as much as possible. The moon's bright enough to see by, but it will cast your shadow if you're in the open." Joe stood, meeting his gaze. "We'll leave the documents in the old coffee tin beneath the loose floorboard by the stove. Whitefeather will know to look there." Sam nodded. "It was our signal during the war. He'll understand." He knelt to embrace Lily one last time. "Be good for Joe. Do everything she says no matter what happens." "I will, Papa." Lily hugged him fiercely. "Don't let the bad men get you." "I won't." Sam's voice was thick. "I'm too tough for them." When he stood, his eyes were suspiciously bright. He handed Joe the packet of documents, which she tucked securely inside her dress. "There's ammunition for the pistol in the saddlebag," he told her, "along with flint, extra food, and blankets. If anything happens, anything at all, fire 3 shots in quick succession. I'll come running." "Nothing will happen," Joe assured him, though they both knew the promise was hollow. "We'll be at the cabin by midnight, back here before dawn." Sam touched her arm, his grip firm. Be careful, Joe. Please obey. The simple plea, so heartfelt, made Joe's breath catch. You too. Don't do anything heroic. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No promises. They slipped out the back door of the cabin where the mare waited, already saddled and laden with small saddlebags. Sam lifted Lily onto the horse's back, then helped Joe mount behind her. Lily leaned back against Joe's chest, small and warm despite the layers between them. Remember, stay in the trees, Sam whispered, handing Joe the reins. And if you hear anything suspicious, don't hesitate to use the pistol. Joe nodded, her throat tight with emotions she dared not name. We'll see you at dawn. Sam stepped back, a solitary figure in the moonlight. At dawn, he echoed. With a gentle pressure of her heels, Joe urged the mare forward. They moved silently across the snow-covered yard, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. At the edge of the property, Joe turned for one last look. Sam stood where they had left him, watching. He raised a hand in farewell, then turned back toward the cabin, one man against whatever the night might bring. Joe faced forward again, tightening her arm around Lily. Hold on, little one, she murmured. Our adventure begins. They entered the shelter of the trees, the mare picking her way carefully through the snow. Above them, stars blazed in the clear night sky, cold and distant. Before them stretched a path fraught with danger and uncertainty. Behind them, they left a man preparing to make his stand alone. Please, Joe prayed silently to whatever forces might be listening. Let us all see the dawn. The forest was a study in contrast, pitch darkness beneath the dense pines, brilliant silver, where moonlight broke through to illuminate the snow. Joe guided the mare along a game trails where the snow was shallower, grateful for the animal's sure-footedness. Lily remained quiet, occasionally pointing out animal tracks or interesting shadows. Despite the gravity of their situation, she maintained a child's wonder at the nighttime forest. Look, she whispered, pointing upward. The stars are so bright. Joe glanced up, momentarily awed by the vast expanse of the night sky. They are, like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Mama used to say they are the eyes of our ancestors watching over us. The simple statement caught Joe by surprise. She told you that? Lily nodded against Joe's chest. She said when people die, they become stars so they can always see the ones they love. That's a beautiful thought, Joe said softly, thinking of her own mother, a woman she had never known but who had given her life. Was she up there too, watching? They rode in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the crunch of snow beneath the mare's hooves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Joe estimated they had covered about half the distance to the trapper's cabin when Lily spoke again. Joe, can I ask you something? Of course, little one. Do you like my papa? The innocent question made Joe's cheeks warm despite the cold. Yes, I like him very much. He's a good man. He likes you too, Lily declared with a child's certainty. I can tell. Oh, how can you tell? He looks at you the way he used to look at Mama, all soft in his eyes. Joe was grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. Your papa is just being kind because I'm a guest. Lily shook her head firmly. No, it's different. And Mama says it's good. She wants Papa to be happy again. Before Joe could formulate a response to this startling statement, the mare suddenly stopped, ears pricked forward alertly. Joe tensed, one hand moving to the pistol tucked in her belt. What is it? Lily whispered. Shh, Joe cautioned, straining her senses. The forest had gone quiet, no owl hoots, no rustling of nocturnal creatures, just silence, heavy and watchful. Then she heard it, the soft jingle of a bridle quickly muffled. The sound came from ahead along the trail they were following. Joe's heart pounded against her ribs. Blackwood's men patrolling the forest. They had anticipated this escape route. With utmost care, Joe turned the mare off the trail deeper into the trees where the shadows were thickest. She leaned forward, whispering in Lily's ear. We need to be very quiet now. Some men are ahead and we don't want them to see us. Lily nodded, her small body tense with understanding. They moved with excruciating slowness, each step of the horse's hooves placed deliberately to avoid snapping branches or crunching snow too loudly. Joe's every sense was heightened, the cold air sharp in her lungs, the scent of pine heavy around them, the weight of the documents against her chest, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Suddenly, Naira's spirit appeared beside them, her form glowing faintly in the darkness. She gestured urgently to the right, deeper into the forest. This way, Joe whispered, guiding the mare in the direction Naira indicated. They moved parallel to the trail, now keeping a safe distance while still making progress toward the trapper's cabin. Twice more they heard sounds of men on horseback, but each time Naira's spirit led them safely around the danger. After what seemed like hours, the trees thinned, revealing a small clearing. In its center stood a crude cabin, little more than a shack, its roof sagging under the weight of snow. "Is that it?" Lily whispered. "Yes," Joe confirmed. "The trapper's cabin." She scanned the area carefully before urging the mare forward. The clearing appeared deserted. No tracks in the pristine snow save those of small animals. Still caution was necessary. "Wait here," Joe told Lily, lifting her down from the horse. She placed the child in the shelter of a large pine where shadows would conceal her. "I'm going to check the cabin first. If anything happens, anything at all, run back into the trees and hide. Understand?" Lily nodded solemnly, her eyes wide in the moonlight. "Be careful, Joe." "I will," Joe promised, drawing the pistol from her belt. She approached the cabin cautiously, every sense alert for danger. The door hung slightly ajar, moving gently in the night breeze. Joe pushed it open with the barrel of her pistol wincing at the creak of rusted hinges. The interior was dark and cold, smelling of old smoke and animal pelts. Joe struck a match, illuminating a single room with a small iron stove, a rough-hewn table, and a narrow cot covered in musty furs. No one had been here recently. A fine layer of dust covered every surface, undisturbed save for the small tracks of mice. Joe exhaled in relief. "Lily," she called softly, "it's safe. Come inside." Lily emerged from her hiding place, hurrying across the clearing to join Joe. Inside the cabin, she looked around with undisguised curiosity. "It's smaller than our house," she observed. "Indeed it is," Joe agreed, lighting a small lantern she found on the table. "But it will shelter us for a little while." Joe moved to the stove, finding the loose floorboard Sam had described. She pried it up, revealing a small space beneath. Inside was an old coffee tin, just as he had said. She removed the documents from inside her dress and placed them in the tin, along with a brief note explaining the situation and requesting Whitefeather take them to the territorial judge in Helena. Then she replaced the tin and floorboard, ensuring everything looked undisturbed. "Now what?" Lily asked, sitting on the edge of the cot. "Now we rest for a little while," Joe said, checking that the lantern was shielded from outside view. "Then we'll head back to your papa." Lily yawned, the excitement and late hour catching up with her. "I'm sleepy." "I know, sweetheart." Joe wrapped one of the blankets from the saddlebag around Lily's shoulders. "You can nap for a bit. I'll keep watch." Lily curled up on the cot, her eyelids already drooping. "Will you sing the snow song, the one you taught me?" Joe smiled, smoothing Lily's curls back from her forehead. "Of course." As Joe sang softly, Lily's breathing deepened into sleep. When the song ended, Joe tucked the blanket more securely around the child's small form, then moved to the cabin's single window. Outside, the moon had risen higher, casting the clearing in silver light. The forest beyond was a wall of darkness sheltering unknown dangers. Somewhere out there, Blackwood's men were searching for them. And back at the homestead, Sam waited alone. Joe felt a familiar presence and turned to find Naira's spirit beside her, gazing down at Lily with transparent affection. "Thank you," Joe whispered, "for guiding us safely." Naira looked up, her expression grave. She pointed urgently back the way they had come, then made a gesture like a gun firing. Joe's blood ran cold. Is he in danger?" Naira nodded emphatically, her form flickering with agitation. "How many men?" Joe asked urgently. "How many has Blackwood sent?" Naira held up both hands, fingers splayed. 10 men. Far too many for one man to fight off even one as capable as Sam. Joe's mind raced. She had promised to deliver the documents and return by dawn. But if Sam was in immediate danger... "Can you stay with Lily?" Joe asked Naira's spirit. "Keep her safe while I go back to help Sam." Naira hesitated, then nodded slowly. She moved to stand beside the sleeping child, her transparent hand hovering protectively over Lily's head. Decision made, Joe gathered her cloak and checked the pistol. She left one blanket and some food on the table for Lily when she woke, along with a brief note explaining that she had gone to help Sam and would return soon. "Take care of her," Joe told Naira's spirit. "I'll bring Sam back safely, I promise." Outside, the mare nickered softly as Joe approached. She mounted quickly, turning the horse toward the homestead. Whatever danger awaited, she would face it. Sam had saved her life once long ago. Now it was her turn to save his. She urged the mare into a trot, following their earlier tracks back through the forest. The moon lit her way, casting long shadows across the snow. In the distance, an owl called 3 times in quick succession, like a warning, or like gunshots. Joe dug her heels into the mare's flanks, urging her to greater speed. "Hold on, Sam," she whispered into the night wind. "I'm coming." Behind her, the trapper's cabin grew small in the distance, sheltering a sleeping child and the watchful spirit of her mother. Ahead lay uncertainty and danger, and a man worth risking everything for. Joe rode hard through the moonlit forest, following their earlier tracks back toward the homestead. The mare, sensing her urgency, maintained a steady pace despite the challenging terrain. Every snap of a twig, every shadow between the trees, set Joe's nerves on edge, but she pushed forward relentlessly. Naira's warning had been clear. Sam faced overwhelming odds. 10 men against 1. Even with the advantage of defending his home, those were impossible odds. As Joe neared the edge of the Winters property, she slowed the mare, approaching more cautiously. The moonlight illuminated the clearing around the cabin, making it easy to spot the horses tied at the hitching posts. 6 of them, meaning at least that many men inside or around the property. The cabin itself appeared quiet, lamplight glowing behind drawn curtains. No movement, no sounds of struggle. Perhaps she wasn't too late. Joe dismounted, tethering the mare to a tree at the forest's edge. She would approach on foot, using the shadows for cover. The pistol felt heavy in her hand as she crept forward, staying low and moving from one patch of darkness to the next. She had nearly reached the barn when a sound stopped her bootsteps, crunching through snow coming around the corner of the building. Joe pressed herself against the barn wall, hardly daring to breathe. A man appeared, rifle cradled in his arms. One of Blackwood's hired guns keeping watch. He paused, scanning the area, then continued his patrol around the perimeter. Joe waited until he had passed, then slipped toward the back of the barn. A small window there would allow her to see inside without being detected. Rising on tiptoe, Joe peered through the grimy glass. The interior was dimly lit by a single lantern hanging from a beam. And there, tied to one of the support posts, was Sam. His head hung forward, blood matting the hair at his temple. His hands were bound behind him, around the post, forcing him into an uncomfortable position. But his chest rose and fell steadily, alive at least. 2 men stood guard, one leaning against the far wall, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. The other sat on an upturned bucket rifle across his knees, looking bored. Joe's mind raced, calculating odds and options. She had the element of surprise, but even if she managed to overcome these 2 guards, there were at least 4 more men to contend with, possibly more, if Naira's count of 10 was accurate. A noise from the direction of the cabin drew her attention. The front door opened, spilling golden light onto the snow. A figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakable, even in silhouette. Blackwood. He strode toward the barn, 2 more men flanking him. Joe ducked down quickly, heart hammering against her ribs. She needed to act now before they reached Sam. Moving to the barn's back door, Joe tested the handle. Locked. She glanced around, desperately seeking another entry point. The hayloft window stood partially open, a ladder leading up to it from the outside for loading hay. Without hesitation, Joe climbed the ladder, wincing at every creak of the aged wood. The window was just large enough for her to squeeze through if she removed her cloak. She did so, draping it over the ladder, then eased herself into the dark hayloft. From this vantage point, she could see the entire barn floor below. Sam remained as she had last seen him, still unconscious. The 2 guards were now more alert, having heard Blackwood's approach. The barn door swung open and Blackwood entered, ducking his head beneath the low door frame. His men followed, weapons ready. "No sign of the woman or child, boss," one reported. "We've checked the cabin top to bottom." "They can't have gone far," Blackwood growled. "Not in this snow, not at night. Find them." "We've got men searching the woods," another said. "If they're out there, we'll find 'em." Blackwood approached Sam's slumped form. "Wake him," he ordered. One of the guards tossed a bucket of water into Sam's face. He jerked awake, coughing and sputtering, disorientation quickly giving way to fury as he recognized his situation. "Blackwood," he spat, struggling against his bonds. "Mr. Winters," Blackwood greeted with mock civility. "So glad you could join us. Now perhaps you'd like to tell me where you've hidden your daughter and that meddlesome woman." "Go to hell," Sam growled. Blackwood sighed as if disappointed. "I thought you might take that approach." He nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward and drove a fist into Sam's stomach. Sam doubled over as much as his bonds would allow, the breath knocked from his lungs. But when he straightened, his eyes burned with defiance. "You can beat me all you want," he gasped. "I won't tell you anything." "Such nobility," Blackwood mocked, "but unnecessary. We'll find them eventually. This territory isn't that big, and I have men in every settlement. They won't get far." Sam said nothing, his jaw set in stubborn silence. Blackwood moved closer, his voice dropping to a menacing murmur. "What I'm more interested in, Winters, is what exactly Miss Tremaine meant about original survey documents and unratified boundary adjustments." A flicker of surprise crossed Sam's face before he could mask it. "Ah," Blackwood smiled coldly. "So she wasn't bluffing. The documents do exist." "I don't know what you're talking about," Sam insisted. "I think you do." Blackwood began pacing before him. "I think you know exactly where the most valuable silver deposit in the territory is located, and I think you know it's technically on your land, not mine." In the hayloft, Joe held her breath. Blackwood was piecing it together faster than they had anticipated. "5 years I've been mining that silver," Blackwood continued. "5 years of wealth flowing into my pockets. And now you and your savage friend think you can take it from me." He laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "I built this territory, Winters. Every business, every politician, every lawman answers to me." "Not every lawman," Sam countered. "Sheriff Jenkins is an honest man." "Jenkins is one man, and men are so fragile." Blackwood gestured to his companions. "Case in point." One of the men handed Blackwood a knife, long-bladed, wickedly sharp. He tested its edge against his thumb, drawing a bead of blood. "Last chance, Winters. Where are the documents? Where have you hidden the woman and child?" Sam's gaze never wavered. "Even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you." "Pity," Blackwood sighed. "I was hoping to resolve this cleanly." In the hayloft, Joe knew she had to act. 6 men against one woman with a pistol were terrible odds. But she couldn't watch them torture Sam. She needed a distraction, something to even the playing field. Her gaze fell on the lantern hanging from the beam. If she could shoot it down, the spilled oil would ignite, creating chaos she could use to her advantage. Taking careful aim with her pistol, Joe steadied her breathing. One shot. She would have only one chance. She squeezed the trigger. The report was deafening in the confined space of the barn. The bullet struck true, shattering the lantern. Burning oil rained down, igniting the hay scattered across the barn floor. Pandemonium erupted below. The men shouted in alarm, some drawing weapons, others trying to stamp out the rapidly spreading flames. Blackwood bellowed orders, momentarily forgetting Sam in the confusion. Joe used the distraction to slide down a support beam to the barn floor. Keeping low, she circled behind the chaos towards Sam. He had spotted her now, his eyes wide with a mixture of relief and horror. "Joe," he mouthed, shaking his head in warning. She ignored him, drawing her knife to cut his bonds. The smoke was thickening, making it difficult to see or breathe. "The woman," one of Blackwood's men shouted, spotting Joe through the haze. "She's here." A bullet splintered the post inches from Joe's head. She ducked, returning fire with her pistol. Her shot went wide, but it bought her precious seconds to slice through the ropes binding Sam. As his hands came free, Sam staggered, nearly falling. Joe caught him, supporting his weight. "Can you walk?" she asked urgently. "Have to," he grunted, straightening with effort. "Lily, safe," Joe assured him, at the trapper's cabin with Naira watching over her. Relief flashed across his face, quickly replaced by determination. "We need to get out of here." The fire was spreading rapidly now, driven by the dry hay and winter-parched wood. Blackwood and his men were retreating toward the door, coughing in the smoke. "This way," Sam urged, pulling Joe toward a back corner of the barn. He kicked at a section of wall, revealing a small door, an escape route he had built for just such an emergency. They crawled through onto the snow outside, gulping the clean, cold air. Behind them, the barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the night sky. "The horses," Sam gasped, staggering to his feet. "We need to get them out." "No time," Joe insisted, pulling him toward the trees. "Blackwood's men will be circling around any second." As if to confirm her words, a shout went up from the far side of the barn. "There they are!" Gunshots rang out, bullets kicking up snow at their feet. Joe and Sam ran zigzagging to make themselves harder targets, heading for the tree line where Joe had left the mare. More shots followed them, but the growing smoke and darkness worked in their favor. They reached the forest's edge, plunging into the concealing shadows of the pines. Joe led the way to where she had tethered the mare. The horse nickered nervously, sensing their urgency. "You first," Joe insisted, helping Sam mount despite his protests. She swung up behind him, taking the reins around his body. "Hold on." Sam leaned back against her, his breathing labored. In the light of the burning barn, Joe could see blood still seeping from the wound at his temple. "Lily," he murmured. "We need to get to Lily." "We will," Joe promised, urging the mare forward. "Just stay with me, Sam. Stay awake." Behind them, the cabin had caught fire now, two flames leaping from roof to walls. Blackwood's men had given up the pursuit, temporarily focused on controlling the blaze before it spread to their horses. Joe guided the mare deeper into the forest, following the same path she had taken earlier. Sam's weight against her grew heavier as his consciousness wavered. "Talk to me," she urged, one arm tight around his waist to keep him upright. "Tell me about Lily, about when she was born." "Stormy night," Sam mumbled. "Like this one. Not snow, but rain. Naira was so strong. Never cried out, not once, and then Lily." A smile touched his lips despite his pain. "Perfect. So perfect." "She is," Joe agreed, blinking back tears. "She's waiting for you, Aram. You need to stay awake for her." "Trying," he slurred. "Head hurts." "I know, but we're almost there." It was a lie. They were still at least 2 miles from the trapper's cabin, but Joe needed him to keep fighting to stay conscious. The mare picked her way carefully through the snow-covered forest, guided by Joe's steady hand and Naira's ghostly presence, which had appeared beside them, lighting the way like a pale beacon. Sam's eyes widened as he spotted the apparition. "Naira," he whispered, "is that really you?" The spirit nodded, her expression tender, despite her obvious concern. "I thought I'd never see you again," Sam murmured. "I've missed you so much." Naira's form seemed to flicker with emotion. She reached out a transparent hand, almost but not quite touching his cheek. "She's been watching over you and Lily all along," Joe said softly. "She never left you." Sam's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he told the spirit. "Sorry I couldn't save you." Naira shook her head emphatically, then pointed forward, urging them to continue. "She wants us to keep moving," Joe translated. "Blackwood's men won't be far behind once they get the fire under control." Sam straightened with effort. "Lead on, then." They rode in tense silence, every sense alert for sounds of pursuit. The forest remained quiet, save for the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of branches in the wind. The moon had begun its descent toward the western horizon, signaling that dawn was not far off. "Almost there," Joe encouraged as the trees began to thin. "Just a little further." The clearing appeared before them, the trapper's cabin, a dark silhouette against the snow. No light showed from within, but Joe knew Lily would be there, hopefully still sleeping peacefully. They dismounted carefully, Sam leaning heavily on Joe as they approached the cabin. Joe drew her pistol, taking no chances after the night's events. "Lily," she called softly, pushing open the door. "It's Joe, and your papa is with me." For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then a small voice cried out, "Papa Joe!" And Lily launched herself from the shadows into Sam's arms. He staggered under the impact but remained standing, hugging his daughter fiercely. "Lily girl," he breathed, "you're safe." "I was so scared," Lily confessed, her face buried in his coat. "I woke up and Joe was gone, and Mama said I had to be brave and wait." "And you were very brave," Joe assured her, closing and barring the cabin door behind them. She quickly lit the lantern, illuminating the small space. In the warm glow, Sam's injuries were more apparent. Blood had dried in a trail down the side of his face, and he moved with the stiffness of someone who had taken multiple blows. "You're hurt," Lily said, her small face crumpling with concern. "It's nothing," Sam assured her, though his pallor belied his words. "Just a bump on the head." Joe guided him to the cot. "Sit. Let me tend to that wound." While Lily watched anxiously, Joe cleaned the cut on Sam's temple with water from her canteen, then applied a poultice of herbs she had brought in her bag. The bleeding had mostly stopped, but the wound would need a proper attention once they reached safety. "What happened, Papa?" Lily asked, holding his hand tightly. "Did the bad men come?" Sam exchanged a glance with Joe over Lily's head. "Yes, sweetheart, but we got away. Everything's going to be all right now." Joe wasn't so certain. They had escaped temporarily, but Blackwood and his men would be searching for them come daylight. The trapper's cabin would be an obvious place to look. "We can't stay here," she said quietly to Sam. As soon as it's light, they'll be combing these woods. Sam nodded, wincing at the movement. Whitefeather's camp is another half-day's ride north. If we can reach him, you're in no condition to travel that far, Joe pointed out. And the mayor can't carry all three of us such a distance. We don't have a choice, Sam insisted. Blackwood won't stop until he finds us. And now that we've destroyed his property, he has even more reason to want us dead. Lily's eyes widened at this frank assessment. Are we going to die, Papa? No, Sam said firmly, gathering her close. No one is going to do. We're going to find Mr. Whitefeather, and he's going to help us get to Helena, where the territorial judge will make everything right. Joe wished she shared his confidence. The odds seemed stacked impossibly against them, injured, outnumbered with a small child to protect, and only one horse between them. Yet as she looked at Sam and Lily huddled together on the narrow cot, something resolved within her. She had found these people by chance or fate or Naira's ghostly intervention, and now they were her responsibility. Her family in a way she had never had before. We'll leave at first light, she decided. Take turns riding the mare. Blackwood's men will expect us to head for town, so we'll go north instead, deeper into the hills. Sam studied her face in the lantern light. You don't have to do this, Joe. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment Lily asked if I could be her mommy, Joe replied simply. And it's been my fight since long before that, when you saved my mother all those years ago. Something shifted in Sam's eyes, a softening, the recognition. I wish I could have saved her, he said quietly. Your mother. You saved me, Joe reminded him. And now I'm going to save you and Lily. That's how it works, we save each other. Lily, listening to this exchange with solemn attention, nodded as if this made perfect sense. Like a real family, she declared. The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with possibility. Not a question, not a hope, a statement of fact from a child who saw truth more clearly than adults ever could. Joe felt her throat tighten with emotion. Yes, she agreed softly, like a real family. Sam's gaze held hers across the small space, something unspoken passing between them. Then he looked away, focusing on Lily. You should try to get some more sleep, Lily girl. We have a long journey ahead tomorrow. Will you and Joe sleep too? Lily asked through a yawn. I'll keep watch, Joe said. Your papa needs to rest so his head can heal. Despite Sam's protest, Joe insisted he lie down with Lily. The child curled against his side, her small body providing warmth in the cold cabin. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep. Sam remained awake longer, his gaze following Joe as she moved about the cabin, checking the door and window, adding wood to the small stove, preparing for their departure at dawn. Thank you, he said finally, his voice a low rumble in the quiet night, for coming back for me. Joe paused in her tasks, meeting his eyes across the room. I couldn't leave you to face them alone. Most would have, Sam said simply. Most have. The weight of his past rejections hung in his words. People who had turned away left him to fight his battles alone. Joe understood that weight all too well. I'm not most people, she said softly. No. Sam agreed, his eyes holding hers. You're not. Something passed between them, then unspoken but undeniable. A recognition, a possibility, a future neither had dared imagine before this moment. Sleep, Joe urged gently. Dawn will come soon enough. Sam's eyes drifted closed, exhaustion finally claiming him. Joe watched over him and Lily, this unexpected family she had found in the wilds of Montana Territory. Outside, the moon completed its journey across the sky, stars fading as the first hint of dawn tinged the eastern horizon. A new day approached, bringing with it unknown dangers and challenges. But for the first time in her life, Joe wasn't facing them alone. We save each other, she had told Sam. And in that simple truth lay all the hope she needed to face whatever might come. Naira's spirit appeared beside her, more transparent now in the growing light. She nodded once approval, clear in her ghostly features, then pointed toward the coming dawn. The message was clear. Time to move on, time to face what waited beyond the safety of these walls. I know, Joe whispered. I'll keep them safe, I promise. As if in response, the first ray of sunlight broke over the distant mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in gold. A new day had begun, and with it, a chance for a new life if they could survive what lay ahead. The first light of dawn painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold. Joe stood in the doorway of the trapper's cabin, watching the eastern horizon brighten. Behind her, Sam and Lily still slept, huddled together on the narrow cot for warmth. They needed to move soon. Blackwood's men would be scouring the forest as soon as there was enough light to track, and the trapper's cabin would be an obvious place to search. Yet Joe was reluctant to wake them, especially Sam, who desperately needed rest to recover from his injuries. A soft sound drew her attention. Naira's spirit stood beside her, gazing at her sleeping family with transparent longing. Even in death, the bond between them remained unbroken. "I'll take care of them," Joe promised in a whisper. "Whatever happens." Naira turned to her, an urgent message in her spectral eyes. She pointed north toward the distant mountains, then made a gesture like riding a horse followed by another indicating pursuit. Joe understood immediately. "Blackwood's men are coming from the north." Naira nodded, then held up 4 fingers. 4 men. Joe's mind raced. "And the others from the south." Another nod. 6 fingers this time. Joe's heart sank. They were surrounded, caught between 2 groups of Blackwood's thugs closing in from opposite directions. The trapper's cabin, once a refuge, had become a trap. She turned back and saw it moving quickly to Sam's side. "Sam," she said urgently, shaking on his shoulder gently. "Wake up. We need to go." Sam's eyes opened immediately, alert despite his injuries. One look at Joe's face told him all he needed to know. "Blackwood, his men are coming. 2 groups north and south." Sam sat up carefully, mindful of Lily still sleeping beside him. "How far?" "Close," Joe said grimly. "Naira's warning us." A flicker of wonder crossed Sam's face at the mention of his dead wife's ghost, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the immediate danger. "We can't outrun them with only 1 horse, not with Lily." "I know." Joe moved to the cabin's single window, peering out at the surrounding forest. "We need another option." Sam joined her, wincing as he stood. His face was pale, the wound at his temple, an angry red against his skin. "There's a ravine about a mile east of here, deep with caves at the bottom. If we could reach it, we might be able to hide." Joe considered this. "We'd leave tracks in the snow." "Not if we follow the stream," Sam countered. "It runs near here all the way to the ravine. The water would hide our trail." It was a desperate plan, but the only one they had. Joe nodded. "How cold is the water?" "Cold enough to kill if you stay in too long," Sam admitted. "But we'd only need to wade the shallows, keep to the edges." "All right." Joe made a swift decision. "We'll follow the stream to the ravine, but we need to move now." Sam gently woke Lily, explaining in simple terms that they needed to play a special hiding game. The child rubbed sleep from her eyes, immediately solemn. "Is it the bad men again?" she asked, her voice small. "Yes, sweetheart," Sam said honestly. "But don't worry, Joe and I won't let them find us." Joe packed their meager supplies, the remaining food matches, the pistol with its few remaining bullets. Sam checked the mare, ensuring she was ready for the journey. "We'll send her in the wrong direction," he told Joe. "Give her a slap and let her run south. Might buy us some time if they follow her tracks instead of looking for ours." Joe nodded, impressed by his strategic thinking even under pressure. "Ready." Sam lifted Lily into his arms, ignoring the pain the movement clearly caused him. "Ready." They slipped from the cabin into the early morning light. The air was bitterly cold, their breath forming clouds before their faces. Sam led the way, moving with surprising stealth for an injured man carrying a child. At the edge of the clearing, he paused, pointing toward a line of scrubby willows about 50 yards away. "The stream runs through there. Once we reach it, we'll release the mare." Joe took Lily from him, allowing Sam to guide the nervous horse. They moved as quickly as they dared across the open ground, painfully aware of how exposed they were against the white snow. The willows provided some cover as they reached the stream, a narrow ribbon of dark water cutting through the snowy landscape. Sam whispered to the mare, stroking her neck one last time before removing her saddle and bridle. "She'll head back to the homestead," he explained to Joe. "It's what horses do, return to their stable. But Blackwood's men don't know that. They'll think we're riding south." With a sharp slap to her flank, Sam sent the mare galloping across the clearing. They watched until she disappeared into the trees, heading south as predicted. "Now us," Sam said, turning to the stream. The water looked icy black against the snow-covered banks. "Stay close to the edge. Step where I step." He entered the water first, his sharp intake of breath the only indication of its temperature. Joe followed, carrying Lily, who buried her face against Joe's neck to muffle her gasp at the cold. The water was shallow near the banks, no more than ankle deep, but bitterly cold, seeping through Joe's boots almost immediately. She gritted her teeth against it, focusing on placing each foot carefully on the slippery stones. They moved downstream, staying just within the water's edge, where their footprints would be washed away. The going was slow and treacherous, every step requiring concentration to avoid slipping or stepping too deeply into the numbing water. Lily remained remarkably quiet, sensing the gravity of their situation. Occasionally, she would whisper something to Joe or point out a particularly beautiful icicle hanging from an overhanging branch. But mostly, she just held on tight, her small body warm against Joe's chest. They had been following the stream for perhaps half an hour when Sam suddenly froze, raising a hand in warning. Joe stopped immediately, straining her senses. At first, she heard nothing but the gentle gurgle of the stream. Then it came the distant sound of men's voices carried on the still morning air. Tracks lead this way. Check the cabin first. Spread out. The voices faded in and out, but the message was clear. Blackwood's men were close, and they were methodically searching the area. Sam gestured for Joe to press against the bank, where an overhang of snow and roots provided some concealment. They huddled there, hardly daring to breathe as the voices grew louder. Through gaps in the overhang, Joe could see movement on the ridge above, men on horseback rifles across their saddles, scanning the landscape below. One of them pointed toward the trapper's cabin visible in the distance. Two riders broke away, heading toward it. They'll find the mare's tracks soon, Sam whispered, his lips close to Joe's ear. We need to move. The ravine isn't far now. Joe nodded, adjusting Lily's weight in her arms. The child had grown heavy, but Joe wouldn't complain. Every step taken was one step closer to safety. They continued downstream, moving even more cautiously now. The banks grew steeper as the stream began to cut more deeply into the landscape, a precursor to the ravine Sam had described. Suddenly, a shout echoed from behind them, sharp, excited. Tracks here, by the stream. Joe's heart slammed against her ribs. They'd been discovered. Run, Sam urged, taking Lily from Joe's arms despite his own weakness. The ravine is just ahead. See where the stream drops. There's a path down just before it. Joe saw it now. A place where the stream plunged over a rocky ledge, falling perhaps 30 feet to continue its journey below. Just before this small waterfall, an animal trail descended the steep bank to the ravine floor. They abandoned any pretense of stealth, splashing through the water toward the path. Behind them, more shouts indicated their pursuers had spotted them. A rifle crack split the morning air, the bullet striking water just feet from where they ran. Joe ducked instinctively, but kept moving one hand on Sam's back to steady him as he carried Lily. They reached the path and half ran, half slid down the steep incline, loose stones and dirt cascading around them. The ravine floor was shadowy, the morning sun not yet reaching its depths. The stream pooled in a small basin at the base of the waterfall before continuing its journey through the narrow canyon. This way, Sam gasped, staggering slightly under Lily's weight. He headed toward the waterfall, skirting the pool to reach the rock face behind the falling water. Joe followed, realizing his intent. Behind the waterfall, eroded by centuries of flowing water, was a shallow cave just deep enough to conceal them if they pressed back against the rock. They squeezed inside the roar of the falling water, overwhelming all other sounds. The space was cramped, forcing them to huddle close together. Lily clung to her father, eyes wide with fear and excitement. Will they find us, Papa? She whispered. No, Lily girl, Sam assured her, though his eyes meeting Joe's over Lily's head held no such certainty. This is a special hiding place. Joe drew the pistol from her belt, checking the remaining bullets, 3, not enough for a prolonged fight, but perhaps enough to buy them time if discovered. Through the curtain of falling water, distorted by its constant movement, they could see figures appearing at the top of the ravine, dark silhouettes against the morning sky. Men with rifles scanning the canyon below. One pointed toward the waterfall. Words were exchanged, though the roar of water drowned them out. Then 2 men began descending the path they had used, while others spread out along the rim of the ravine, effectively cutting off any escape in that direction. If they search behind the waterfall, Joe began. They will, Sam said grimly. It's an obvious hiding place. Joe's grip tightened on the pistol. I'll hold them off. You take Lily and go deeper into the ravine. Sam shook his head firmly. We stay together. Sam. No. His voice was quiet but unyielding. We're not separating, not now. The intensity in his eyes silenced Joe's arguments. This man who had lost so much would not lose anyone else, not without fighting to his last breath. Lily, sensing the tension, pressed closer between them. "Mama says there's another way," she whispered. Both adults looked at her sharply. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Joe asked. "Mama's here," Lily explained, pointing to an empty space beside them, where Joe realized with a start Naira's spirit now stood. "She says there's a tunnel at the back of the cave. It goes up." Sam stared at the empty space, then at his daughter. "Are you sure, Lily?" Lily nodded emphatically. "Mama used to come here to get special plants. She showed me the tunnel once, but said it was only for emergencies." Joe was already feeling along the back wall of the cave, her fingers searching for any opening. The rock was damp and slick with moss, but then yes, a gap narrow but passable, hidden behind a curtain of hanging roots. "She's right," Joe breathed. "There's a passage." Sam's expression was a complex mixture of relief and wonder. "Naira," he whispered to the empty air. "Thank you." And Joe could have sworn the temperature around them warmed slightly, as if in response to his gratitude. "The men are almost at the pool," Joe warned, peering through the waterfall. "We need to go now." The passage was extremely narrow, requiring them to proceed in single file. Sam insisted Lily go first, then Joe with him bringing up the rear. The tunnel sloped upward at a steep angle, rough-hewn steps carved into the living rock at irregular intervals. "Kiowa made these tunnels," Joe realized aloud, recognizing the handiwork of her mother's people. "This must have been a sacred place once." "Naira said something similar," Sam confirmed from behind her. "She called it the pathway of spirits." Mom, Lily leading the way with fearless curiosity, called back to them. "It gets wider up ahead. I can see light." Joe squinted into the darkness. Yes, a faint glow illuminated the tunnel walls ahead, growing stronger as they ascended. The passage eventually opened into a small chamber, perhaps 10 feet across. The light came from above, where a narrow fissure in the rock ceiling allowed sunlight to filter through. Ancient pictographs covered the walls, handprints, animal figures, and abstract symbols that Joe recognized from her childhood among the Kiowa. "It's a medicine cave," she said softly, awed by the discovery. "A place where shamans would come to connect with the spirit world." Lily moved to the center of the chamber, looking up at the shaft of light that illuminated her small form. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Even Sam, practical and grounded as he was, seemed affected by the sacred atmosphere of the place. "Is there a way out?" he asked quietly, as if reluctant to break the spell. Joe examined the chamber carefully. Besides the tunnel they had entered through, another opening was visible on the opposite wall, this one larger, seemingly leading further upward. "This way, I think," she said, moving toward it. This second passage was wider and higher, allowing them to walk almost upright. It curved gently, spiraling upward through the living rock. Occasionally, small openings in the walls provided glimpses of the outside world, the ravine below, the forest beyond, the mountains in the distance. "We're circling up to the top of the ridge," Sam observed, "but where Blackwood's men are searching." Joe nodded. If they could reach the ridge undetected, they might be able to escape into the deeper wilderness beyond, where even Blackwood's men would be reluctant to follow. The passage continued its upward spiral for what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes. Finally, it opened onto a small ledge carved into the face of the cliff, hidden from below by an outcropping of rock. From this vantage point, they could see the entire ravine spread below them, the waterfall, the pool, and Blackwood's men methodically searching the area. Two men had indeed discovered the cave behind the waterfall and were emerging now, gesturing to their companions that it was empty. Others were working their way deeper into the ravine, weapons ready. "They don't know about the tunnel," Joe whispered, relief flooding through her. "We've lost them, at least for now." Sam surveyed the landscape with a practiced eye. "We're about half a mile from Whitefeather's camp," he said, pointing to a distant ridge. "If we can reach it without being seen." "The documents," Joe remembered suddenly. "We left them at the trapper's cabin in the coffee tin." "It's too late now," Sam said grimly. "Blackwood's men will have found the cabin by now. Our only hope is to reach Whitefeather and convince him to help us get to Helena. Without proof. We have our testimony, and Whitefeather knows Blackwood's character. He's seen the man's cruelty firsthand." It wasn't much to build a case on, but it was all they had. Iman. Joe nodded. "Lead the way, then." They followed a narrow game trail that led from the ledge into the pine forest beyond. The going was slower now. Sam's strength was clearly flagging the effects of his injuries and the cold taking their toll. Joe took Lily again, allowing Sam to conserve his energy. The morning wore on, the sun climbing higher in the clear blue sky. They moved as quietly as possible through the forest, alert for any sign of pursuit. Occasionally, distant shouts indicated that Blackwood's men were still searching, but the sounds grew fainter as they put more distance between themselves and the ravine. Lily, resilient as only a child could be, maintained a cheerful attitude despite the danger. She pointed out animal tracks in the snow, identified birds by their calls, and occasionally reported what Mama was telling her about the plants and trees they passed. Joe found herself increasingly accepting of Lily's ability to see and communicate with spirits. Perhaps because she shared the gift, or perhaps because the evidence of Naira's guidance had repeatedly saved their lives. Whatever the reason, Joe no longer questioned the child's reports of her mother's presence. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a small valley. In the center of the valley, nestled among ancient pines, stood a cluster of structures, part cabin, part teepee, a unique blend of white and native building techniques. White Feather's camp, Sam confirmed, relief evident in his voice. We made it. As they started down the slope toward the camp, a figure emerged from the largest structure, a tall man with iron gray hair worn in two long braids. He wore buckskin leggings and a wool shirt, a rifle held casually but ready in his hands. Joseph Whitefeather, Sam called, raising his hand in greeting. It's Sam Winters. The man lowered his rifle slightly, watching their approach with cautious eyes. As they drew closer, Joe could see that he was older than she had first thought, perhaps 60, with deep lines etched into his copper skin and eyes that held the wisdom of many hard years. Winters, Whitefeather acknowledged when they reached the valley floor. His gaze traveled over Joe and Lily, assessing. You bring trouble to my door. It wasn't a question. I'm sorry, old friend, Sam said sincerely. We had nowhere else to go. Whitefeather's expression softened slightly. The child is well. I'm fine, Mr. Whitefeather, Lily piped up. We played a hiding game in a magic cave. A ghost of a smile touched the older man's lips. Did you, His gaze shifted to Joe, questioning. This is Josephine Tremaine, Sam introduced. A friend, Joe. This is Joseph Whitefeather, former scout for the 7th Cavalry and the finest tracker in the territory. Joe inclined her head respectfully. I'm honored to meet you, Mr. Whitefeather. Kiowa, Whitefeather observed, noting her features, but raised by whites. Yes, Joe admitted, at the Green Valley mission after my mother died. Something like recognition flickered in Whitefeather's eyes. The pregnant woman Winters saved during the raid. You are her child. Joe stared at him, startled. You knew my mother. I was there, Whitefeather said simply. I saw Winters carry her to safety when others would have left her to die. His gaze moved to Sam. A circle completes itself. The observation hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Then Whitefeather gestured toward his home. Come, you are cold and hungry. We will talk inside. The interior of Whitefeather's dwelling was warm and surprisingly spacious. A fire burned in a central pit, smoke rising through an opening in the roof. Furs and blankets covered the packed earth floor, and various herbs and plants hung drying from the rafters. Sit, Whitefeather instructed, indicating the blankets near the fire. The child can rest. You both look as if you've had a difficult journey. While Lily curled up on a soft fur, quickly falling asleep, Sam explained their situation to Whitefeather Blackwood's attempts to steal their land, the discovery of the silver mine, Naira's murder, and their desperate flight through the wilderness. Whitefeather listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. When Sam finished, he was silent for a long moment, gazing into the fire. Blackwood is a disease upon this land, he said finally. Many have suffered under his hand, white and Indian alike. But he has power connections. The territorial governor counts him as a friend. That's why we need to reach the federal judge in Helena, Joe explained. Show him the evidence. She stopped, remembering. The documents we left at the trapper's cabin. These documents. Whitefeather reached behind him, producing a familiar coffee tin. I found them this morning when I checked my trap lines. Sam stared, then laughed, a sound of pure relief. You found them? But how did you know to look in the cabin? I did not, Whitefeather admitted, but I saw Blackwood's men searching the area and grew curious. I reached the cabin before they did, found the tin where Naira always kept her special herbs. His eyes, dark and knowing, held Sam's. She came to me in a dream last night, told me to be watchful. Joe felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. You see them too, she realized. The spirits. Whitefeather studied her with new interest. As do you, and the child. It wasn't a question. Yes, Joe confirmed. It's how we found the tunnel behind the waterfall. Naira showed us. A nod as if this explained everything. The pathway of spirits. Few know of it now. It was sacred to the Kiowa long ago. Can you help us reach Helena? Sam asked, bringing the conversation back to their immediate problem. Whitefeather considered this. It is a long journey, especially in winter. Blackwood will have men watching all the roads. But there are other ways, Joe pressed. There are always other ways for those who know how to find them. Whitefeather rose, moving to a chest in the corner of the room. He returned with a rolled piece of hide, which he spread on the floor between them. It was a map drawn in traditional native-style landmarks represented by symbols, rather than to scale distances marked by the number of suns required to travel them. Here we are. Whitefeather indicated a symbol of a pine tree with a line through it. And here is Helena. He pointed to a circle with many smaller circles inside it, a white man's city. Between them lies Blackwood's territory, he continued, indicating a large area marked with a symbol Joe didn't recognize. His men patrol here, here, and here. He pointed to various points along what would be the most direct route. But there is another way. His finger traced a circuitous route that led high into the mountains before descending toward Helena from the west. Through the high passes, difficult terrain, but Blackwood's men avoid it. Too many old spirits dwell there for their comfort. Sam studied the route, frowning. That would take days, and in this weather, it would be dangerous, Whitefeather acknowledged, but less dangerous than facing Blackwood's rifles. Joe considered the options. The mountain route would indeed be treacherous, especially with Lily. But Whitefeather was right. Blackwood would have men watching every conventional approach to Helena. We need to split up, she said suddenly. The idea had been forming in her mind, and now it crystallized into certainty. Sam, you and Lily stay here with Mr. Whitefeather. I'll take the documents to Helena. Absolutely not, Sam responded immediately. I won't let you face that journey alone. A woman traveling alone will attract less attention, Joe argued, especially if I dress in traditional Kiowa clothing. I'd be taken for just another Indian beneath notice. It's too dangerous, Sam insisted. The mountains in winter. I grew up among the Kiowa until I was 7, Joe reminded him. I know how to survive in the wilderness, and I'm not injured as you are. Sam looked to Whitefeather for support, but the older man's expression was thoughtful. She speaks wisdom, Whitefeather said slowly. A lone woman might pass where others would be stopped, and the spirits favor her. They have shown this already. The spirits won't stop a bullet, Sam snapped. No, Whitefeather agreed, but they might guide her path away from those who carry them. Joe moved closer to Sam, placing a hand on his arm. This is the best chance we have. You know it is. You and Lily will be safe here, and I can travel faster alone. Sam's jaw worked as he struggled with the decision. If anything happened to you, it won't, Joe assured him with more confidence than she felt. I'll reach Helena, present the evidence to the judge, and return with federal marshals to arrest Blackwood. And if Blackwood's influence reaches even the federal judge, Sam challenged, then I'll go higher, to the governor in Bozeman, or even to Washington if necessary. Joe's voice was firm. I won't stop until justice is done. Sam searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt. Finding none, he sighed heavily. When would you leave? Tomorrow at first light, Joe decided. Blackwood's men will still be searching the area around the ravine. By the time they widen their search, I'll be well into the mountains. Whitefeather nodded approval. I will prepare supplies and draw a more detailed map of the route. There is a Crow encampment, halfway friends of mine. They will shelter you for a night. The decision made, they turned to more immediate concerns, food, rest, and tending to Sam's injuries. Whitefeather proved to be a skilled healer, applying a poultice of herbs to the wound on Sam's temple and brewing a tea that eased his pain. As evening approached, Lily woke from her nap, refreshed and curious about their new surroundings. Whitefeather, surprisingly gentle with the child, showed her his collection of eagle feathers and taught her a simple crow song. Joe watched them, a bittersweet ache in her chest. In just a few days, these people had become more important to her than anyone in her life. The thought of leaving them, even temporarily, was painful. Yet she knew it was necessary if they were ever to have a future together. After supper, a simple but hearty stew of dried venison and wild onions, Whitefeather excused himself to prepare Joe's supplies for the journey. Lily, tired from the day's excitement, fell asleep quickly on a pallet near the fire. Sam and Joe found themselves alone, seated side by side watching the flames dance in the central pit. "I still don't like this plan," Sam said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I know," Joe acknowledged, "but it's the right one." Sam turned to face her, the firelight casting his features in sharp relief. "Why are you doing this, Joe, risking your life for us, for my land?" It was a question he had asked before in different ways. This time, Joe decided to answer with complete honesty. "Because for the first time in my life, I've found somewhere I belong. Someone I belong with." She met his gaze steadily. "I've spent my whole life running from who I am, hiding my ability to see spirits, ashamed of my mixed blood. But with you and Lily, I don't have to hide anymore. I can just be me." Sam's expression softened. "Joe, you don't have to say anything," she said quickly. "I know this isn't the time or place, and I know Naira will always hold a place in your heart, as she should. I would never." Her words were cut off as Sam leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, almost hesitant, his lips warm against hers. Joe froze in surprise for a heartbeat, then responded, her hand rising to rest against his cheek. When they finally drew apart, Sam's eyes held a mixture of wonder and something like peace. "I've wanted to do that since the night you stood up to Blackwood on my porch," he admitted. Joe smiled, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the nearby fire. That long," he confirmed. "It scared me feeling that way again. After Naira, I thought that part of me was dead." "And now?" Joe asked softly. Sam took her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "Now I know better. And I know Naira would approve. She sent you to us after all." As if in response to her name, a gentle breeze stirred the air around them, carrying the faint scent of sage and wildflowers. Naira's scent, Joe realized. Approval and perhaps blessing. "Come back to us," Sam said, his voice low and intent. "Whatever happens in Helena, whatever it takes, come back to us." "I will," Joe promised. "Nothing could keep me away." They sat together in companionable silence. After that, hands still joined, watching the fire burn down to embers. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges. But tonight, in this moment, there was peace and hope. Dawn broke clear and cold, the eastern sky painted in shades of pink and gold. Joe stood outside Whitefeather's dwelling, dressed in traditional Kiowa garments. The older man had provided buckskin leggings, a warm tunic, and a fur-lined cloak. Her black hair was braided in the traditional style, completing the transformation. "You look like your mother," Sam said quietly from behind her. Joe turned, smiling. "You remember her?" "I only saw her briefly, but yes." Sam's eyes held warmth as they took in her appearance. She had the same strength in her eyes. Whitefeather emerged from his home carrying a small pack. "Everything you need is here," he told Joe. "Food, fire-making tools, medicine, and this." He handed her a small leather pouch on a cord, a protection charm. "The old spirits will recognize it and maybe watch over you." "Thank you," Joe said, slipping the cord around her neck, "for everything." Lily was the last to emerge, rubbing sleep from her eyes. When she saw Joe in her Kiowa clothing, her eyes widened. "You look like a princess from a story." Joe knelt, opening her arms to the child. "I have to go away for a little while, Lily, but I'll come back, I promise." Lily threw her arms around Joe's neck, hugging her fiercely. "Mama says she'll help watch over you," she whispered. "So you won't be alone." Tears pricked at Joe's eyes. "Tell her thank you for me." Standing, Joe faced Sam one last time. Words seemed inadequate for everything she wanted to say, so she simply stepped forward and kissed him, a promise, a goodbye, a beginning. 3 days to Helena, Whitefeather reminded her. Then 2 back, if all goes well. Joe nodded, securing the pack on her shoulders. "I'll return as soon as I can." With a final look at the 3 figures standing before Whitefeather's home, her newfound family, Joe turned and began the long journey into the mountains. The documents that could destroy Blackwood were secure in an inner pocket of her tunic, the weight of them a constant reminder of what was at stake. The first part of the journey was relatively easy, a gradual ascent through pine forest following game trails that wound ever upward. Joe moved steadily, conserving her strength for the more difficult terrain ahead. By midday, she had reached the first ridge Whitefeather had marked on his map. From this vantage point, she could see for miles in every direction the rolling forest below, the distant plains beyond, and ahead the towering peaks of the Montana high country. Joe paused to eat a small portion of the pemmican Whitefeather had provided, washing it down with melted snow. As she rested, she sensed a familiar presence beside her. "Naira," she acknowledged, not turning. "You're a long way from home." The spirit made no sound, of course, but when Joe finally looked, she saw approval in the ghost's transparent features. "I'll take care of them," Joe promised, "always." Naira's form seemed to shimmer in agreement before fading from view. Not gone, Joe sensed, but conserving her energy for when she might be needed most. The afternoon brought steeper terrain and deeper snow. Joe fashioned crude snowshoes from pine branches and rawhide from her pack, a skill she had learned in childhood from the Kiowa elders. They helped distribute her weight, preventing her from sinking too deeply into the drifts. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Joe searched for a suitable place to make camp. Whitefeather had marked several possibilities on his map: a hollow tree, a small cave, an overhang of rock that would provide shelter from the elements. She chose the cave, a shallow depression in a rocky outcropping that faced away from the prevailing wind. Gathering dead wood from nearby, Joe built a small fire at the mouth of the cave, creating a barrier of warmth between her and the encroaching night. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped precipitously. Joe huddled close to her fire, wrapped in the fur-lined cloak, eating sparingly of her provisions. The mountains at night were eerily beautiful stars blazing overhead in a black velvet sky, the snow reflecting their light, until the whole landscape seemed to glow with an inner radiance. Despite the cold and her solitude, Joe felt a strange peace. All her life she had been caught between two worlds, not fully white, not fully Kiowa, gifted with an ability that most found frightening or suspicious. Now, perhaps for the first time, she had found a place where all parts of herself could exist in harmony. If she succeeded in this mission, if she reached Helena and convinced the federal judge to act against Blackwood, she could return to Sam and Lily. They could build a life together, one where spirits and the living coexisted, where her mixed heritage was a strength rather than a burden. With these hopeful thoughts, Joe drifted into a light sleep, the fire burning low before her. She woke suddenly hours later, every sense alert. Something had disturbed her rest, a sound of presence. Joe lay perfectly still, listening. There, a soft crunch of snow, the whisper of fabric against fabric. Someone was approaching her campsite. Moving with deliberate slowness, Joe reached for the knife at her belt. The fire had burned down to embers, providing little light but also making her less visible to whoever lurked in the darkness. A figure appeared at the edge of the firelight, tall, broad-shouldered, familiar in its arrogance. "Miss Tremaine," Thomas Blackwood greeted, his voice carrying easily in the still night air. "Or should I say, Miss Kiowa, you look quite the savage in that getup." Joe rose in one fluid motion, knife held ready. "How did you find me?" Blackwood smiled coldly. "Did you think Whitefeather was the only one who could read sign? Your tracks weren't hard to follow once we knew where to look." He gestured, and two more men emerged from the darkness, rifles trained on Joe. "And we've been watching his camp since yesterday. Saw your touching farewell this morning." Joe's mind raced. If Blackwood had been watching Whitefeather's camp, then Sam and Lily were in danger too. "They're fine for now," Blackwood said, reading her expression. "I left most of my men to keep an eye on them. Insurance, you might say." "What do you want?" Joe demanded, though she already knew the answer. "The documents, of course." Blackwood held out his hand. "Give them to me now, and perhaps I'll let Winters and his brat live." Joe's grip tightened on her knife. "And if I refuse," Blackwood sighed, as if disappointed by her predictability, "then my men at Whitefeather's camp have orders to burn it to the ground with everyone inside." He paused, allowing the threat to sink in. "Your choice, Miss Tremaine. The documents or their lives." For a heartbeat, Joe considered attacking. One desperate lunge with the knife might catch Blackwood by surprise. But his men would shoot her before she could reach him, and then Callum and Lily would still be in danger. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" she asked, playing for time. "You don't," Blackwood admitted candidly. "But what choice do you have? Besides, I'm a businessman. Once I have what I want, killing Winters serves no purpose. It would only draw unwanted attention." It was a cold calculation, but it held a certain logic. If Blackwood had the documents exposing his illegal mining operation would be impossible. With no threat to his interests, he might indeed leave Sam and Lily alone. Or he might kill them anyway, tying up loose ends. Joe felt trapped, caught in an impossible choice. The documents in her tunic represented justice for Naira's security, for Sam and Lily a future for all of them. But what good was justice if they weren't alive to see it? A soft breeze stirred the dying embers of her fire, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and wildflowers. Naira present, even here watching, waiting. And suddenly Joe knew what to do. "Very well," she said, reaching slowly into her tunic. "You win, Blackwood." She withdrew the packet of documents, holding them just beyond the reach of the firelight. "But I want your word written and signed that you'll leave the Winters family alone, permanently." Blackwood's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Of course, I'm a reasonable man." He reached into his coat, producing a small notebook and pencil. "I'll write it right now." While he scribbled in the notebook, Joe glanced toward the sky. The stars seemed to pulse with increased brightness, as if responding to her silent plea. "Now, Naira," she thought, "if you're truly here, if you can truly influence the physical world, now is the time." The wind picked up, suddenly swirling around the small campsite. The dying embers of Joe's fire flared to life, sparks flying upward in a spiraling column. Blackwood looked up, startled. "What the... The wind intensified, becoming a localized whirlwind that swept around the campsite. Snow lifted from the ground, joining the sparks in a blinding vortex of white and red. Joe didn't hesitate. In the confusion, she lunged forward, driving her knife deep into Blackwood's shoulder, not a killing blow, but one that would incapacitate. He screamed more in rage than pain, staggering backward. His men fired blindly into the whirlwind, bullets whistling harmlessly into the night. Joe dropped to the ground, rolling away from the line of fire. The documents were still clutched in her hand, her most precious possession. With Blackwood and his men momentarily blinded by the supernatural storm, she had one chance at escape. She ran plunging into the darkness beyond the campsite. Behind her, Blackwood's enraged shouts faded as the wind continued its unearthly howl. Joe didn't look back, focusing only on placing one foot before the other. The mountainside was treacherous in the dark, each step risking a fall on the snow-covered slope. But fear and determination drove her forward, away from Blackwood, away from his threats against those she loved. Dawn found her miles from the campsite, exhausted but unharmed. The documents were safe, still tucked securely in her tunic. But Blackwood's words echoed in her mind. "I left most of my men to keep an eye on them." Insurance, you might say. Sam and Lily were in danger. Perhaps Whitefeather, too. With Blackwood wounded but alive, his rage would be terrible. Joe faced a choice: continue to Helena as planned or return to warn Sam. The logical choice was clear reach. Helena, present the evidence, bring back federal marshals to arrest Blackwood and his men. It was the safest option, the one most likely to succeed. But logic couldn't override the fear in her heart. If anything happened to Sam and Lily while she was gone, no, she couldn't risk it. She had to go back, warn them of the immediate danger. Together, they could find another way to reach Helena. Decision made, Joe consulted Whitefeather's map. There was a more direct route back, dangerous, involving a steep descent, but one that would save precious hours. Without hesitation, Joe turned back the way she had come, her path now taking her down instead of up toward the people who had become her family. "Hold on," she silently urged them. "I'm coming." The descent was treacherous, the slope steeper than it had appeared on Whitefeather's map. Joe moved as quickly as she dared, occasionally sliding down snow-covered inclines when walking proved impossible. By midday, she had reached the foothills where the terrain became more forgiving. The forest provided better cover, allowing her to move more freely without fear of being spotted from a distance. As she neared Whitefeather's valley, Joe slowed, approaching with caution. If Blackwood's men were indeed watching the camp, rushing in blindly would only endanger everyone. She found a vantage point on a ridge overlooking the valley, concealing herself behind a fallen log. From here, she could see Whitefeather's dwelling and the surrounding area. At first glance, everything appeared normal. Smoke rose from the central smoke hole, suggesting someone was inside. There was no sign of Blackwood's men, no horses tethered nearby, no unusual movement. But something felt wrong. The valley was too quiet. No birds sang, no small animals moved through the underbrush. It was as if the entire area was holding its breath, waiting. Joe remained hidden, watching. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, she caught a flash of movement, a man emerging briefly from the trees on the far side of the valley, then disappearing again. One of Blackwood's watchers confirming her fears. How many were there, and where were Sam, Lily, and Whitefeather? Were they inside unaware of the danger surrounding them, or had they already been captured, used as bait to draw her back? Joe needed to get closer to assess the situation more accurately before deciding on a course of action. Moving with the stealth she had learned from her Kiowa elders, she began circling the valley, staying within the tree line, invisible to any watchers below. It took nearly an hour to reach the back of Whitefeather's dwelling. Here, a small stream provided water for the camp, and a narrow path led to the structure's rear entrance. If she could reach that entrance unseen, Joe waited for a cloud to pass over the sun, dimming the light momentarily. In that brief shadow, she darted across the open ground to the back of the dwelling, flattening herself against the wall beside the entrance. Listening intently, she could hear voices inside, low, male, unfamiliar. Not Sam, not Whitefeather, Blackwood's men. Should have heard something by now, one was saying. Boss said he'd fire 3 shots if he found her. Maybe he's still tracking her, another replied. These mountains are big. Or maybe she got the drop on him, a third suggested. Wouldn't that be something, a half-breed woman outsmarting Thomas Blackwood? Laughter quickly hushed. Watch your mouth. If the boss heard you talk like that. Well, he ain't here, is he? Just us and these 3. Joe's heart raced. Sam, Lily, and Whitefeather were alive then. Prisoners, but alive. What do we do if the boss doesn't come back? The first voice asked. A pause. Then we have our orders. At sunset, if we haven't heard from him, we burn this place to the ground. With them inside. Sunset. Joe glanced at the sky. Perhaps an hour away. Not much time. She needed to act, but how 4 men inside armed with hostages? And likely more watching the valley from the forest. The odds were impossible. Unless Joe reached into her tunic, touching the protection charm Whitefeather had given her. The old spirits, he had said, would recognize it. Would they help her now as Naira had on the mountainside? There was only one way to find out. Closing her eyes, Joe clutched the charm, focusing her thoughts as she had seen the Kiowa elders do in her childhood. Not a prayer exactly, but an opening of herself to the world beyond the physical. I need help, she projected into that other realm. Not for myself, but for those I love. For a child who can see across the veil as I do. For a man who respects the old ways, though he cannot see them. For your people threatened by those who would destroy all that is sacred. At first, nothing happened. The wind continued its gentle sigh through the pines. The sun continued its arc toward the horizon. The voices inside continued their grim discussion. Then gradually, Joe became aware of a change. The quality of the light shifted, taking on a golden hue that had nothing to do with the setting sun. The air grew warmer, though winter still held the land in its grip. And most strangely, the sounds of the forest, the rustling of branches, the distant call of birds, seemed to slow, stretching out until they became almost unrecognizable. Joe opened her eyes to a transformed world. The physical landscape remained the same, Whitefeather's dwelling before her, the valley spread around it, the mountains beyond. But overlaid upon this reality was another transparent figures moved through the trees, some human in form, others more animal-like, still others defying description altogether. The spirits had answered her call. One figure approached her, an elderly Kiowa woman, her spectral form dressed in the traditional garments of a medicine woman. She studied Joe with ancient eyes, then nodded once in recognition. Granddaughter, the spirit seemed to say, though no sound disturbed the air. You have called, and we have come. What would you ask of us? Joe explained quickly, mentally projecting images of Sam, Lily, and Whitefeather held captive of Blackwood's men, planning to burn them alive, of the documents that could bring justice but were useless if those she loved perished. The spirit woman listened, her expression unchanging. When Joe finished, she turned to the other spectral figures gathered at the edge of the forest. This one sees truly, she communicated to them. Her heart is pure, her cause just. Shall we aid her? A consensus seemed to form among the spirits, some nodding, others simply fading slightly as if in agreement. The elderly woman turned back to Joe. We will create a diversion, she explained. When the moment comes, you must act swiftly. Save your family. We will hold the others at bay as long as we can. Joe nodded, understanding. Thank you, grandmother. The spirit woman's form began to fade. Go now. Prepare yourself. When the wind rises, move. And then she was gone along with the golden light and the strange distortion of sound. Joe was back in the ordinary world, the sun continuing its inexorable descent toward the horizon. But something had changed. A tension in the air, a gathering of unseen forces. Joe felt it in the prickling of her skin, in the sudden alertness of her senses. She drew her knife, readying herself. Whatever diversion the spirits planned, she would be prepared to take advantage of it. The waiting seemed interminable, though in reality it was likely only minutes. The sun touched the rim of the western mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. Then it began. A wind, gentle at first but rapidly gaining strength, swept through the valley. Trees swayed, branches creaking in protest. Snow lifted from the ground, swirling in miniature whirlwinds that danced across the open space. Inside Whitefeather's dwelling, the voices grew concerned. What's happening? Just a wind. Calm down. I don't like it. Feels wrong. The wind intensified, becoming a howling gale that tore at the structure's roof, threatening to lift it entirely. Objects inside clattered to the floor. Men shouted in alarm. Joe's moment had come. She burst through the rear entrance, knife ready. The scene inside was chaos. Four of Blackwood's men struggling to maintain their footing as the wind tore through the dwelling, upending furniture and scattering provisions. In the center of the room, bound to support posts, were Sam, Lily, and Whitefeather. They appeared unharmed, though Sam's face showed fresh bruises, evidence he had not been taken without a fight. One of Blackwood's men spotted Joe. The woman, he shouted, reaching for his pistol. Before he could draw, a spectral form materialized directly before him, the elderly Kiowa medicine woman, her transparent features terrible in their intensity. The man screamed, stumbling backward in terror. Similar apparitions appeared before the other gunmen, each taking a form calculated to inspire maximum fear: a massive grizzly bear, a Kiowa warrior with bloody wounds marking his chest, a cavalry officer with half his face missing. Joe didn't waste the opportunity. She darted to Sam first, cutting his bonds with swift strokes of her knife. "Joe," he gasped, disbelief and joy mingling in his voice. "How?" "No time," she interrupted, moving to free Lily next. "We need to go, now." Whitefeather, once freed, needed no urging. He moved to a corner of the dwelling, retrieving a rifle and ammunition that had apparently escaped their captor's notice. "This way," he directed, heading for the rear entrance. "Through the stream bed. It will hide our tracks." Blackwood's men were still paralyzed by the supernatural display before them, their weapons forgotten, as they cowered in primitive fear. The wind continued its furious assault, as if determined to tear the dwelling apart around them. Joe grabbed Lily, lifting the child into her arms. "Stay close to me," she told Sam. "Don't look back." They fled through the rear entrance, Whitefeather leading the way toward the stream that ran behind his home. The air outside was a maelstrom of wind and snow, visibility reduced to mere feet. Yet somehow a path remained clear directly before them, as if invisible hands were parting the storm to guide their escape. They reached the stream, wading into the icy water without hesitation. It was shallow enough to walk in, deep enough to hide their trail. Whitefeather led them downstream, away from his violated home, away from Blackwood's terrified men. Behind them, unearthly howls rose above the wind, not the voices of living creatures, but the gathered rage of spirits long bound to this land, now unleashed against those who threatened it. They traveled through the storm-racked forest for hours, following the stream until it joined a larger river, then continuing along its bank. Whitefeather seemed to know exactly where he was going, despite the darkness and the continuing gale. Finally, when Lily was nearly asleep in Joe's arms, and all of them were exhausted beyond measure, they reached a sheltered hollow beneath a rocky overhang. Here the wind's fury was somewhat abated, allowing them to rest. "We'll be safe here for a time," Whitefeather said, helping Joe settle Lily on a bed of pine boughs. "The storm will keep Blackwood's men occupied until morning at least." "What was that?" Sam asked, his voice hushed with awe. "Back there in your home. Those apparitions." Whitefeather glanced at Joe. "To her," she called them. Sam turned to Joe, who was tucking her cloak around Lily's sleeping form. "Joe, what happened?" Joe straightened, meeting his gaze. "I asked for help," she said simply, "from the spirits that dwell in these mountains. And they answered." "Like Naira helped us at the waterfall," Sam said, slowly, understanding dawning. "And on the mountainside with Blackwood." Joe nodded. "Yes, But more, many more. The old ones, the ancient spirits of this land, they recognized the charm Whitefeather gave me, and they came. Sam was silent for a long moment processing this. Finally, he asked, "Why did you come back? You were supposed to be heading to Helena with the documents." Joe reached into her tunic, withdrawing the packet of papers. "I still have them. But Blackwood found me on the mountain. He told me he had men watching you, that he'd kill you all if I didn't give him the documents." "And yet you kept them," Sam observed. "Why, Bo? Because I didn't trust him to keep his word," Joe explained. "And because I knew I needed to warn you to help you escape. The documents mean nothing if you and Lily aren't safe." Sam moved closer, taking her hand. "You risked everything to come back for us." "You would have done the same," Joe said simply. "Yes," Sam agreed. "I would have." Whitefeather, who had been preparing a small smokeless fire, looked up at them. "The spirits helped you because they recognized your heart, woman. You fight not for yourself, but for those you love. For justice, these are things the old ones understand." "Will they help us again?" Joe asked. "We still need to reach Helena to present the evidence against Blackwood." "The spirits have their own rules, their own limitations," Whitefeather cautioned. "Do not expect another miracle like today's." "Then we'll make our own way," Sam declared, "together." Joe smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. They were together. They were alive, and they still had the documents. There was hope. "Rest now," Whitefeather advised. "Tomorrow we plan our journey to Helena. It will not be easy. Blackwood will be searching for us, with every man at his disposal." "We'll find a way," Joe said confidently. "We've come too far to fail now." As they settled around the small fire, Lily stirred briefly, her eyes opening to fix on a point just beyond their circle. "Mama says it's going to be okay," she murmured sleepily. "She says we're family now. All of us." Joe glanced to where Lily was looking. For a moment, she thought she saw a familiar shimmer in the air, Naira watching over them still. Then the apparition was gone, though the feeling of her presence remained. "Your mama is right," Joe said softly, smoothing Lily's hair. "We are family." Sam's arm encircled her shoulders, drawing her closer. "Family," he echoed the word, carrying the weight of a promise. Outside their shelter, the storm raged on, hiding their tracks, concealing them from pursuit. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But tonight, in this moment, they had each other. And sometimes Joe reflected, that was miracle enough. 2 weeks later, Joe stood on the porch of the newly rebuilt cabin, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of orange and pink. Beside her, Sam worked steadily, fitting a new window frame into place. "It's coming along well," Joe observed, running her hand along the smooth wood of the porch railing. "Almost feels like home again." Sam glanced up, a smile warming his features. "It is home. Our home." The word ours still sent a thrill through Joe, even after everything they had been through together. So much had changed in such a short time. Their journey to Helena had been arduous, but successful. With Whitefeather guiding them through little-known mountain passes, they had reached the territorial capital undetected. The federal judge, an honest man as it turned out, had been appalled by the evidence they presented. Federal marshals had been dispatched immediately to arrest Blackwood and his men on charges of fraud, illegal mining, and attempted murder. They had found Blackwood still recovering from the knife wound Joe had inflicted, his empire crumbling around him as his men deserted in the face of federal authority. The original boundaries of Sam's land had been reinstated, including the silver deposit Blackwood had been illegally mining. The territorial governor, eager to distance himself from the scandal, had personally apologized to Sam and offered compensation for the years of stolen wealth. They had returned to find the homestead in ruins, the cabin and barn burned to the ground in Blackwood's men's final act of spite. But with the compensation money and the help of neighbors who had long feared Blackwood, but now stepped forward as friends, rebuilding had begun immediately. Whitefeather had refused their invitation to stay, preferring to return to a solitary life in the mountains. But he visited occasionally, bringing herbs for Joe's growing medicine practice and teaching Lily more of the old ways. And Naira. Her spirit appeared less frequently now, as if her unfinished business had been completed. But sometimes in the quiet of evening or the first light of dawn, Joe would sense her presence, watchful, approving, at peace. "Papa Joe, come see what I found," Lily's excited voice carried from the edge of the yard where she had been playing. They moved together to where the child stood proudly pointing at a small green shoot pushing up through the snow-patched ground. The first flower of spring, Joe identified, kneeling to examine the tiny plant. It's called bitterroot. The Kiowa consider it sacred, a symbol of endurance through hardship. Can we keep it, Lily asked. For our garden. We'll mark the spot, Sam decided. Let it grow where it chose to be. But we can plant others around it, create a special place for it. Lily beamed, pleased with this solution. Mama would like that. She always loved flowers. Joe and Sam exchanged a glance, no longer surprised by Lily's continued connection to her mother's spirit. It was part of who she was, as Joe's similar ability was part of her. Yes, she would, Sam agreed, his voice gentle. And so will we. It will be beautiful come summer. Summer, Joe's heart lifted at the thought. A season she would spend here with this man and this child who had become her family. Planting gardens, healing the sick, building the life that embraced both worlds she had always inhabited, the physical and the spiritual. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across their land, truly theirs now in every sense, Sam's arm slipped around Joe's waist. Happy? He asked softly. Joe leaned into him, watching Lily carefully place stones in a circle around the bitterroot shoot. Yes, she answered simply, more than I ever thought possible. From the corner of her eye, Joe caught a familiar shimmer in the fading light, Naira watching her family one last time before moving on to whatever awaited her beyond the veil. There was no sadness in the apparition, only serene acceptance and perhaps a touch of gratitude. Thank you, Joe thought toward the spirit, for bringing me here, for trusting me with them. The shimmer brightened briefly in acknowledgement, then faded entirely, not gone perhaps, but at peace, no longer bound to this world by unfinished businesses or unresolved fears. Mama says goodbye, Lillian suddenly looking up from her task. She says she doesn't need to stay anymore because we have Joe now. Sam's arm tightened around Joe's waist. She's right, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We do have Joe now, and Joe has us. Forever, Lily asked, coming to stand before them, her small face serious in the gathering dusk. Joe knelt to the child's level, taking her hands. Forever, she promised. No matter what comes, we'll face it together, as a family. Lily's smile was like the sunrise, brilliant, warming, full of promise. Good, she declared. That's what I told Mama you'd say. As night settled over the Montana wilderness, the small family made their way back to the half-rebuilt cabin. Inside, a fire burned warmly, casting golden light over simple furnishings and the rough-hewn table where they would share their evening meal. It wasn't grand or perfect. There were still walls to raise fences, to mend a life to build from the ashes of what had been destroyed. But it was there as a home for two souls who had thought themselves destined for loneliness, and for a child wise enough to see what they needed before they knew it themselves. And perhaps in the whispers between worlds, in the ancient wisdom of spirits who had watched over this land long before human feet walked upon it, this union had always been destined. Three broken pieces finding in each other the completion they had sought all along. As Joe took her place at the table, Sam beside her and Lily across from them, she felt a certainty settle in her heart. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. And that made all the difference. Outside, the first star appeared in the darkening sky, a distant light in the vast wilderness. Inside, another kind of light burned brighter, the light of home, a family of love that had overcome every obstacle to bloom in the most unlikely of places. A light that, like the bitterroot pushing through the snow, had endured hardship to find its moment in the sun. A light that would continue to grow season after season, year after year, in this home they had built together. A light that whispered in the language of both worlds. Welcome home.